Claire Obscure Expedition 33 started as a steampunk Victorian England overrun by zombies and aliens. The first 6 months of development was spent on a completely different game, under the codename Project W, or as the team eventually joked, we lost. In that early version, you walked through fog-choked streets with steam pipes hissing overhead while undead creatures limped around like it was London's last night on Earth. And this wasn't concept art. The team had real environments, characters, and a full pitch trailer ready for investors. The only thing that survived that era was the combat system, the hybrid turn-based, real-time active input style the game still uses today. Everything else, rebooted from scratch. One of the people who helped reshape that early chaos was Jennifer Svedberg-Yen, the lead writer who originally joined the project through a Reddit voice acting audition. She brought with her a short story about a painter lost inside her own artwork, and a daughter trying to rescue her. A seed that would quietly grow into the emotional core of Expedition 33. Then came the turning point. An investor asked, "Imagine you had more support. What would you really want to make?" That question made creative director Guillaume Broche stop, breathe, and rethink everything. The Victorian zombie and alien world felt too familiar, too derivative, and didn't match the painterly aesthetic he was drifting toward, or the French identity of his team. So they did something almost unheard of in game development. They kept the combat and threw the entire world away. Out went Victorian England. In came the Belle Epoque, Art Deco influences, the Paintress, the Gommage, the Monolith, and the haunting doomsday number that determines who disappears each year. Broche blended this with inspiration from the French fantasy novel Le Horde du Contrevent, about a doomed expedition trained since childhood, and Svedberg-Yen's Painter World short story. And that's how Expedition 33 transformed from a pulp sci-fi monster mash into a painterly world about time, mortality, memory, contrast, and fate. The gameplay survived, the world didn't, and the emotional core, the mother, the daughter, the art, rose from the ashes of Project W. Before any zombies, aliens, Belle Epoque cities, or the Paintress, everything started with one quiet little Unreal Engine project called Sandfall. This wasn't a studio, or a team, or even a pitch. It was just Guillaume Broche, still working at Ubisoft in 2019, teaching himself Unreal in his spare time because he wanted to finally build his own RPG idea. That tiny prototype, literally just a personal experiment, would end up giving its name to the entire studio years later. Broche kept refining it, polishing it, trying to push the idea further. And like most solo devs, he eventually hit that point where developers need help from others, so he reached out online. He wasn't running a company yet. He was just a guy on Reddit in April 2020 posting a casting call for voice actors to help bring his demo to life. And a fun fact, that's the post that eventually brought Jennifer Svedberg-Yen into the picture. This was also the middle of COVID era, and it was around then that Broche made the big choice. Leave Ubisoft and commit fully to the project. Not the steampunk version, not the Belle Epoque version, just the idea he'd been grinding on alone since 2019. The one still called Sandfall on his hard drive. By the time the first lockdowns ended, he teamed up with programmer Tom Gearman and producer Francois Maurice to formalize everything. They founded a new studio in Montpellier in 2020, and instead of inventing a new name, they just stuck with the title of Broche's first Unreal project, Sandfall Interactive. And this is where things get interesting in the timeline, because the moment Sandfall Interactive exists, Broche isn't just doing a personal experiment anymore. Now he and the team have to actually build a full demo. And that demo is where Project W starts. When Sandfall went from one person with an Unreal project to a studio making a full RPG, the tech grew with it. The game started in Unreal Engine 4 around 2019 and 2020. Once Unreal Engine 5 was stable, they moved everything over. That move mattered. UE5 gave them Lumen, Unreal's dynamic lighting system that simulates light bouncing in real time, and Nanite, which lets them use very detailed models without ruining performance. For a small team trying to look like a big-budget RPG, that is huge. At the same time, they changed how they made characters. They switched to MetaHuman, Epic's system for building realistic digital humans with ready-made professional face rigs. Instead of building every face rig by hand, they used MetaHuman bases and added their own style. They recorded actors for facial motion capture, ran that through MetaHuman Animator to turn it into animation database, and drove it with animation blueprints that handle idle motion, eye movement, and reactions in combat. That is why characters do not stand there like mannequins. They glance at attacks, their faces move with the performance, and they actually feel present in the scene. They also built custom materials so characters don't stay spotless. Dirt, blood, sweat, and tears can appear and change during fights and story moments. When someone has been through hell, they look like it, not just act like it. It fits the whole painterly apocalypse idea because the world and its people visibly wear the damage. For sounds, they chose to stay inside Unreal instead of using outside audio tools. They used metasounds, which works like a logic graph for audio. It lets them decide how sounds react instead of just playing a file. They feed that into submixes and modulation so they can control groups of sounds, filters, and volume in real time. On top of this, they built a music manager and blueprint that keeps track of whether the player is exploring, in combat, in a new phase, or in a cutscene. It blends tracks on the correct musical beat instead of hard cutting between them. Talking about music, let's talk about one of my favorite parts of the game, the music. Because the music feels like its heartbeat. As the visuals become more reactive, the soundtrack had to match that same level of responsiveness. Expedition 33 does not just play long background tracks. The score is built to shift in real time. Inside Unreal, the team created a full interactive music system using metasounds in their own music manager. Music is separated into contexts like exploration, combat, and cinematics, and the music manager decides when each layer comes in, how it fades, and how it transitions. It reacts to level triggers, story beats, and even dialogue cues, so the soundtrack behaves like part of the game's logic instead of a playlist running in the background. A lot of that system was built to support the work of the game's composer, Laurent Testard, a French composer and multi-instrumentalist whose style blends classical orchestration with more modern textures. He wrote most of the score in his home studio, then recorded selected pieces with the Orchestre Courier at MIDI Live Studios in Paris. His music leans orchestral, but he adds very specific acoustic colors to make it feel personal. Piano is a major voice, sometimes built from over a dozen layered virtual pianos to create one unique timbre. Guitar is the base for themes like Serene, where the entire track grows from a simple guitar idea. He uses winds like low recorders for atmosphere, and even brought in an accordion for the mime battle theme because the enemy design almost demanded something that French. Vocals are another defining part of the soundtrack. Singers like Alice Dupont-Percier and Ben Starr carry a lot of emotional weight, and the game treats the voice as a central instrumental color instead of an occasional accent. Combined with Testard's background and the world's Belle Epoque inspiration, it is why so much of the music is written and sung in French and why the soundtrack feels tied directly to the culture the game draws from. There is also a deliberate tension in the score. The world tries to hold on to its refined Belle Epoque identity while the paintress corrupts everything, and the music mirrors that struggle. Graceful melodies sit beside aggressive textures. Combat sound design brings in distorted electronic influences, even touches of dubstep and drum and bass, clashing with the more classical writing. Tracks like the Serene theme start soft and charming, but twist into something darker once the fight begins. The result is a soundscape that reflects the world's central idea, beauty being pushed to its breaking point. While the music leans into Belle Epoque France through sound, the enemies do something similar on the visual side. The artist behind many of those creatures is Nicolas Maxon Francombe, a concept artist and creature designer on Clair Obscur Expedition 33, responsible for shaping a lot of the game's enemies' look and feel. He has said he very deliberately wanted to get away from the usual sci-fi and zombie reference pile. Instead of filling mood boards with space marines and horror movie monsters, he went hunting in a completely different place. He started researching mugs and cutlery. He started researching ceramics. Most of his research, in his own words, was on ceramic textures. He studied glazes, cracks, smooth curves, and weird shapes in pottery, and those forms are what pushed him toward the enemy designs that ended up in the game. It's absolutely absurd to think that inspiration for these things came from mugs and cutlery that we find everywhere, going from cups and plates to monsters you fight, is just insane. So the process for the monsters is almost the opposite of a standard enemy pipeline. Step 1. Refuse the usual genre diet of science fiction, space, and zombies. Step 2. Stare at ceramics until you find interesting silhouettes and surface patterns. Step 3. Build hostile shapes whose bodies, cracks, and ridges feel like sculpted clay more than flesh or metal. Once you know that, it's hard to unsee it. A lot of Expedition 33's enemies have smooth, rounded masses interrupted by sharp fractures, like chipped porcelain. Others look like walking ornaments with stacked rings, repeating bands, and decorative motifs that feel more like vase construction method than anatomy. Their surfaces often have the mottled or crazed look of aged glaze, not muscle or armor. Francombe has also mentioned that the same ceramic research helped him keep inventing original environments, and that lines up on screen. The world is full of strange rock and object shapes that feel carved, cast, or poured instead of naturally eroded. You get landscapes and structures that look halfway between scenery and giant decorative pieces, which fits the whole idea of a reality shaped by a painter and by art. This choice ties neatly back into the Belle Epoque and French art angle. The game is set in a dark fantasy version of Belle Epoque France, and that era is famous for its decorative arts, including ceramics and porcelain. The visual style of the game goes even further than Belle Epoque and Art Deco references, and inside the studio, they actually have a name for it that captures the whole mood much better. They call it Deco Punk. It's not an official marketing term, but it is how the team describes the look internally when they talk about the world's decay and the way the paintress's corruption twists everything. It starts with a base of Belle Epoque and Art Nouveau, the ironwork, curves, ornamentation, and painterly elegance that the period is famous for. Then Art Deco is layered on top of that in the engineered parts of the world, the monolith, the machines, the monumental structures, the hard-edged geometry, the stylized framing, and blocky motifs all pull from classic Deco language, the side of early 20th century France that was obsessed with order, progress, and controlled design. But none of it stays pristine. The world is literally a painting in the fiction, and the corruption spreading from the paintress affects everything. You see it in the cracked surfaces, the smeared colors, the overpainted rock shapes, the half-erased architecture. Critics describe the landscape as a kind of living contamination where organic, mineral, and vegetal forms are covered with corrupted paint. Even cliffs and trees look like they have been slashed over by a brush that has started to lose control. That is why the city and its monuments feel like they were once elegant Belle Epoque and Deco showpieces, now rotting in place. This is exactly why the Deco Punk label fits. In general, Deco Punk takes the clean geometry, glamour, and optimism of classic Art Deco and pushes it into something more speculative or dystopian. It's not just Deco reproduced faithfully, but Deco bent out of shape. Clair Obscur does the same thing. It starts with the opulence and engineering confidence of Belle Epoque and Deco France, and then distorts it under the pressure of the paintress's failing power. The clean lines stay, but they're cracked. The ornament stays, but it is stained. The grand silhouettes remain, but they feel fragile, like the structure underneath is dissolving. And this has led the game to being personally one of the most artistically unique games I have ever seen. There's nothing aesthetically similar to Expedition 33, and there you have the reason why. Let's talk about the combat and the gameplay of the game and the deep nuance of it all. The combat system takes the whole theme of beauty under pressure and turns it into mechanics. Expedition 33 calls its battles reactive turn-based, which basically means you plan your actions in turns, but the enemy phase is all real-time. When a monster swings at you, you're not watching an animation and waiting to see the damage. You're dodging, parrying, or jumping at the exact right moment. The parry window is deliberately tiny. A dodge is safer and more forgiving, but it doesn't give you anything back. A perfect parry restores ability points and opens the door to powerful counters. So the whole system rewards players who want to take risks and punishes the ones who mistime it by even a few frames. And landing those parries perfectly is one of the best experiences that the game gives us. I remember landing my first parry and screaming so loud I'm pretty sure the neighbors thought I was being attacked. Tom Guillermin, the lead programmer, talks about how this was one of the first ideas he and Guillaume Broche prototyped. Even when it was just cubes fighting cubes, they could feel that the real-time defense gave the turn-based structure a different kind of energy. But getting the timings right took forever. Gearman mentions that they kept adjusting the parry and dodge windows until one internal demo finally made the whole studio realize the system worked. Everyone took turns trying to beat a boss, passing the controller after each failure, and suddenly the timing felt exactly right. It clicked. That was the moment they knew this hybrid combat would define the game instead of feeling like a gimmick. Even the devs had a moment like countless other gamers landing their first parry, and the inspiration for this game comes from a place no one would have thought. Brosh said straight out that Sekiro is the reason parries exist at all. He was playing it during development and got obsessed with the feeling of landing a perfect block. At some point he asked himself why turn-based games could not have the same satisfaction. That's where the tight, animation-driven windows come from. You're supposed to read an enemy's wind-up, judge the frame it will hit, and commit. The design leans into it because Brosh himself is a high-level action player. People who have followed him point out that he's done no-hit Devil May Cry 5 boss runs built entirely around perfect blocks, which lines up with the comfort the team had in making a timing system this demanding. Players and reviewers felt it immediately. The dodge gives you space to breathe, but the parry is strict and punishing. If you nail it, you erase the blow, get ability points back and unlock big counters. If you miss it, you feel it. Press pieces like The Verge highlight how hard the window can be to learn, especially early on. Sandfall listened to that feedback. After launch, patch 1.3.0 made story mode noticeably easier by widening parry and dodge timings by around 40% and reducing incoming damage on that difficulty. The intent wasn't to weaken the system, but to give less action-focused players a way to enjoy the combat without hitting a wall. Looking at Expedition 33, you may think that the games must be developed by a massive team of talent from all around the world. Well, if you thought that, you'd be living under a rock, because everyone knows that Expedition 33 is an indie game. Behind the curtains, the amazing graphics and amazing parries are just a small team. The game is being held together by a surprisingly small team spread across 2 French cities. In the CNC interview, Sandfall explains that Clair Obscur was built between Montpellier and Paris. Montpellier is where the core team lives, the people handling design, programming, systems, tools, day-to-day gameplay work. Paris is home to a dedicated cinematic division, focused on performance capture and cutscenes. So while most of the game's backbone is written and tuned in the south, the big story moments and character performances are crafted in a separate unit in the capital. The credits back this up. There's a specific block labeled Sandfall Interactive Cinematic and Performance Capture, with a cinematic director, cinematic artists, animators and lighting specialists grouped together, listed alongside the other internal departments like narrative and audio. It's a proper in-house film team inside a relatively small studio. Producer Benjamin Demonge mentions that the main team is around 30 people, and that even with external partners, they're nowhere near the headcount of a typical AAA game. So when you see the camera work, the staging and the acting land as hard as they do, that's coming from a compact core in Montpellier working hand in hand with a focused cinematic crew in Paris. 2 locations functioning like different limbs of the same studio rather than separate companies. The world design is not the only place where Sandfall plays with contrast. The same philosophy shows up in the interface. Clair Obscur keeps exploration almost completely clean, then hits you with a bold, stylized, information-heavy presentation the moment a fight begins. Producer Francois Maurice has said several times that this was intentional. They removed the classic minimap from moment-to-moment exploration because it pulls your eyes away from the environment. He explains that when players have a minimap, they start staring at a corner of the screen instead of actually looking at the world. And Sandfall wanted you to discover the journey the same way the Expedition does. So the exploration UI is basically nothing. No constant minimap, no cluttered indicators. They added a small compass on the world map later in development so players could find north more easily, but that's it. The world map exists as a separate screen, not a floating HUD element. Tweaktown describes it as a stripped-back UI, and that is exactly how it feels. The game wants you to read the environment, not the interface. Then combat starts and everything flips. The battle screen becomes loud, stylized, and packed with information on purpose. Guillaume Broche has said openly that Persona 5 is his gold standard for battle UI and presentation. He talks about how Persona's dramatic camera shifts and scene-like turns feel like watching a movie. and Expedition 33 tries to capture that same energy. Reviewers have joked that the battle UI is basically Persona 5's long-lost cousin, and they're not wrong. The snappy transitions, the angled panels, the emphatic camera cuts, the clean hierarchy of information, all of it comes from that influence. There is also a functional reason for the dense combat UI. Because Expedition 33's system is reactive turn-based, the battle HUD needs to do a lot at once. It has to show action points, which fuel every ability in free aim attack. It has to display turn order and enemy states like break or status effects so you can set up your strategies. And it has to provide clear visual feedback for parries, dodges and counters, because those timing-based defenses directly affect your AP economy and your ability to launch big attacks. So combat gets its own visual language where layered UI and shifting cameras communicate everything you need while also delivering that cinematic punch Sandfall wanted. It fits the same pattern the whole game follows. Exploration lets the world speak for itself, so the interface steps back. Combat is where the systems and spectacle collide, so the UI leans in and becomes part of the performance. Expedition 33's world has something deeply tragic within its core. If you observe and have the eyes for it, you'll see it woven into the world. The whole world layout reinforces that idea of something beautiful breaking under its own creator. But it also does something else. It behaves like a world caught in a glitch. Art studies on Clair Obscur would describe the aesthetic as living contamination, a space that is less a natural landscape and more a painting that has become sick. This concept seems weirdly similar to another world I know. I'm looking at you, painted world of REMS from Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3. Organic shapes, plants, rock and even water look like they've been overwritten by bad paint. Every stone and river reads like a brushstroke gone wrong. You're not walking through an environment. You're walking across the surface of a painting that has been overworked to the point where the image can no longer hold itself together. You see it most clearly in Lumiere, a spectral double of Belle Epoque Paris. Buildings float or tilt at impossible angles like memories that no longer connect. Art Nouveau balconies twist around ruins like invasive growths. Light fractures like it is shining through cracked stained glass. There are staircases suspended in midair that lead nowhere, glass towers shattered into impossible segments, and canyons whose walls sag like wet paint sliding down canvas. The repetition of shapes, the broken geometry, the floating architecture all give the city that wrong feeling you get from digital corruption or a warped file. But it's not a technical glitch, it's a narrative one. The world behaves like a painting whose structure has begun to fail, which makes sense once you learn it was created by Aline Descendra inside a magical canvas and is now being torn apart by two opposing forces, Aline trying to preserve the painted world and Renoir trying to erase it from within. Everything ties straight back to the paintress. In the story, she is the painted version of Aline, the figure everyone blames for the yearly gommage when the number on the monolith changes and people vanish. Inside the world, she looks like an executioner, but the deeper lore shows she is a grieving mother who refuses to let go of a son and the painted copies of a family. As she tries to hold the world together, and as Renoir chips away at it to force her out, the landscape starts to behave like a corrupted file. Analyses describe the terrain as literally painted and repainted by a divine or delirious brush. Red forests, fluorescent waterfalls, and sharply carved mountains do not imitate nature. They imitate paint misbehaving. Creatures become living tableaux, living canvases, twisted into shapes that feel like incomplete renderings of human forms. So when the environment floats, fractures or loops into impossible shapes, it reads like a spatial glitch built into the friction itself. It's the canvas breaking. It's the paintress's grief warping the world she created. It's Renoir's erasure cutting into the structure. It's a painting trying to survive a glitch in its own maker. And that collapsing world becomes even more haunting when you look at who the story is actually following. Jennifer Svedberg-Yen, the game's narrative lead, has said outright that Clair Obscur avoids the classic JRPG setup where one chosen hero stands in the center and everyone else orbits them. The cast isn't built around one protagonist. It's built like a real expedition team, which makes sense coming from Svedberg-Yen's own background in human factor psychology and NASA analog astronaut programs. She wrote this group like a crew with different roles, different emotional loads, and different points of view, not a single hero dragging everyone along. She explains it even more directly. Act 1 belongs to Gustave, Act 2 belongs to Verso, Act 3 belongs to Maëlle, and she jokingly calls it her decoy, main but not main, hidden main character structure. Gustave is the decoy, Verso is the one who feels like the real protagonist, but isn't quite. and Mael is the hidden main character the story has been quietly shaping the whole time. You feel that design immediately. Act 1 trains you to treat Gustav as the heart of the story. He's the 32-year-old engineer with 1 year left before the next Gamage. He's the emotional hook with Sophie. He's the point of view the game uses to pull you into Expedition 33. And then he dies. Early, violently, and deliberately, protecting Mael. The writers said that twist was planned from the beginning specifically to inflict the same kind of grief on players that the world feels every year. Gustav is the perfect decoy. He teaches you how to care, then the game just rips him away. Then Act 2 hands the narrative over to Verso in a way that feels almost seamless. He becomes your camp perspective, your conversation hub, your anchor through most of the mid-game. He has the biggest mystery arc, his immortality, his link to Renoir, the truth about the canvas. You peel those layers back with him, and it genuinely feels like the game has swapped protagonists. But Svedbergian is clear about why she calls him the main character, but not really. He carries the middle of the story, but the emotional center of the ending doesn't belong to him alone. He's a guide through the history of the world, not the voice that resolves it. And then there is Mael. The game hides her in plain sight. She starts as Gustav's younger foster sister, the one who seems like she is along for the expedition. But piece by piece, Act 3 reveals that Mael's not just an anchor member of the party. She is Elise de Sendra, the real daughter Aileen lost, the child Verso died to protect, the missing piece of the family's grief. The entire canvas, the entire world, and the entire century of pain all loops back to her. That is why Svedbergian calls her the hidden main character. She is the emotional key. The story waits to tell you that until the end. Once that truth lands, the whole world reframes itself around her. The endings revolve entirely around Mael's choice. Either she stays and rebuilds this broken painted world, keeping the canvas alive and creating a bittersweet new order, or Verso destroys it with her blessing, pulling everyone, including Aline, back into reality and erasing the painted world forever. That isn't Verso's decision alone. It is Mael's identity, Mael's memory, Mael's will that decides what the story means. It's a clever structure. Gustav gives you the entry point and the first heartbreak. Verso carries the mystery and the metaphysics of the canvas. And Mael holds the final answer, the emotional truth that binds the family's trauma, the paintress's collapse, and the fate of Lumiere together. Depending on who you connect with, you might walk away thinking any of the three was the protagonist. And that's exactly what Svedbergian wanted. An expedition where every member is a potential main character, and the story changes depending on whose pain you feel most strongly. We talked about the world, the cast, and now let's talk about the most painful part of the game. And it's not something you would expect. If you've played Expedition 33, you know what I'm talking about. The painstaking minigames. The game does something completely different, something that feels like it escaped from an entirely separate JRPG, and somehow survived out of spite. Gestrel beaches. Those quiet little coves scattered across the world's map look peaceful at first, almost like bonus vacation spots in the middle of a collapsing painting. But every one of them hides a different kind of challenge. A parkour course, a wall climb, a time trial sprint, a vertical only up nightmare, and of course, the infamous volleyball raft battle. Beat them and you unlock swimsuit outfits for the cast. They do absolutely nothing for your stats. They exist purely because someone on the team really wanted them. And that someone was Guillaume Broche. In a French podcast interview later summarized by Kotaku, he straight up admits the Gestrel minigames were his idea, and he references his inspirations with absolute honesty. Not blitzball, not fishing, not anything remotely dignified. He talks about Final Fantasy X's Chocobo race and the lightning dodging trial. The ones everyone remembers for the wrong reasons. The ones so annoying they live rent-free in your brain for decades. He even jokes about the strange nostalgia those miserable minigames create, saying there's a kind of hatred but love that sticks with you. And then he adds, almost proudly, that he personally insisted on putting the Gestrel beaches in the game. If you hate Gestrel volleyball, he says, that's on him. And you can tell. Games Radar called the Gestrel challenges the most grief-inducing parts of Expedition 33 after 50 hours of play, saying they made the game's brutal parry timing look easy. Kotaku describes them as leaning deliberately into the worst parts of the old JRPG minigames, demanding precision platforming inside a combat-oriented control scheme and asking for absurd dedication for nothing but a swimsuit reward. Even the platforming tower gets compared to the awkward climbing challenges in Final Fantasy XIV, the kind of fiddly, clumsy design that's terrible and unforgettable at the same time. Players reacted exactly the way Brosh probably hoped they would. Steam threads, Reddit posts, Discord chats. Half the community calls the Gestural beaches awful, painful, or straight up 0 out of 10 design. The other half defends them as perfectly tuned nostalgia torture. People complain about the vertical climb being pure agony, and then in the next breath celebrate that reaching the top unlocks Monaco's absurd swimsuit, which they describe as absolute perfection and exactly the spirit of those old stupid Final Fantasy minigames. It's another piece of the same contrast the whole game thrives on. A world defined by grief and corruption, and then a sudden beach where you get emotionally destroyed by a volleyball. A story about collapsing canvases and generational trauma, hiding a platforming trial that looks like it escaped from a PS2 fever dream. Expedition 33 doesn't just reference JRPG history. Sometimes it parodies it. Sometimes it lovingly recreates the parts you thought you'd forgotten. And sometimes it puts you on a raft and asks you to time a jump so bad you start questioning your entire build. And with that, if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to like and subscribe because that goes a long way for us. Thanks. Anyway, you've explored the world of Lumiere, fought through the bosses and your heart was touched by all the characters, and after all the world bending, the grief, the glitching canvas, and the collapsing expedition, you arrive here, the ending. And it couldn't get any better than this. The story finally gives you a choice that feels like the emotional gut punch the whole game has been building toward. Not a moral choice, not a good or evil choice, an impossible one. When you finally reach the end, the last fight can be played as Mael or as Verso, and whichever one you pick decides the fate of the world you've been trying to save. If you step forward as Mael, as Alicia, she keeps the canvas alive. Lumiere is rebuilt. The people return. Gustave and Sophie get to live again, and Verso is reborn inside the painting. Everything the expedition fought for comes back in this dreamlike, bittersweet victory. But there's a cost. Mael begins to show the same signs of decline Aline did, the same slow fading under the weight of maintaining a world that shouldn't exist. It's beautiful, but it's a sacrifice. She saves everyone by taking on the burden alone. And if you step forward as Verso, he does the opposite. He destroys the canvas and everyone inside it, ending the painted world completely. Lumiere vanishes. The expeditions, the memories, the illusions, all of it collapses. But the real Descendra family in the outside world finally has a chance to heal. Aline can face the grief she hid from. Renoir can stop trying to erase a fantasy to bring her back. Alicia is left with nothing but a vision of her painted family waving goodbye as they dissolve. Reality stays, but the dream dies forever. The writers have said this with absolute clarity. There is no correct ending. Jennifer Svedberg-Yen has repeated it across interviews. No canon, no official branch, no true answer. Both endings were built with intention. Both carry warmth, both carry loss, and both reflect what she calls a truth about life. Nothing is ever perfect, and every choice comes with a cost. She even talks about how players came to her saying they agonized for hours over that final decision. And she treats that not as a problem, but as the point. The story should hurt, because the world hurts. Kotaku, Video Gamer, Notebook Check, everyone quotes the same thing. Sandfall refuses to mark one ending as the real one, which is the exact storytelling stance people like to call a shrug of God. Not indecision, not evasion. Conscious choice to leave space for the player's own history and emotions to decide what feels right. And on the other side of the team, Guillaume Broche mirrors that philosophy in a different way. He says he likes really sad stories, the kind that don't clean themselves up for you. He wanted that final choice to be an impossible one, keep the canvas and its people at the cost of Alicia's future, or destroy it and free her while erasing an entire world. And he made sure it wasn't good versus evil, or hero versus villain. Everyone in this family cares about everyone else. That's why the conflict hurts. That's why the ending stings no matter which way you turn. By the time you finish, Expedition 33 has done something very few RPGs attempt. It hands you two endings where neither one feels like a reward, neither one feels like a mistake, and both feel like closing a book you'll keep thinking about for weeks. The story doesn't tell you which world deserves to exist. It asks you which world you can live with losing. If you explore long enough, past the broken cities and corrupted cliffs, the world starts whispering about the things that prowl in the paint. The expeditions called them Nevrons. To most players, they just seem like another family of monsters scattered across the continent. But the journals paint a darker, stranger picture. Nevrons aren't just enemies. They're a whole category of corrupted life. There are the story-linked ones like the Jar and the Dominaire, and there are the wild ones, the Whites, the roaming beasts, the unknown forms that the old expeditions treated almost like game to hunt. Some expeditions even turned it into competition. Expedition 62 kept a literal scorecard of Nevron kills until something big, a big Nev as they called it, erased the whole party. They treated these creatures like dangerous wildlife, but wildlife you could track, categorize, tally. That tells you something about how normalized the danger had become. By the time you reach the continent, the Nevrons have basically become part of the ecosystem of death. Everyone knows they're deadly, but they're familiar deadly, which makes the tragedy of Expedition 59 feel even more brutal. Because on paper, it starts as the most mundane bad decision imaginable. Julian's journal lays it all out in the kind of exhausted handwriting that feels like he already knows this is going badly. They make camp in a cave in Yellow Harvest. They kill an Nevron, and then Lorraine, in her infinite optimism, or infinite stupidity, depending on how you read the entry, convinces the others to try eating it. Even Julian can't believe it. He literally calls her an idiot in the journal. The inky Nevron flesh does exactly what you'd expect. It poisons them instantly, vomiting, cramping, completely immobilized. Not dead, but so sick they can't even move on. And this is where a lot of players assume, incorrectly, that this is what killed Expedition 59. But it isn't. The Nevron only set the trap. The kill came from somewhere else entirely. Julian, trying to help, wanders deeper into the cave and finds glowing mushrooms growing in Eski's nest. He doesn't know they're toxic. He doesn't know those luminescent spores are lethal. He just wants to settle everyone's stomachs. So he harvests the mushrooms, cooks a broth, and serves it to the entire party. And that is what ends them. Not the Nevron, not some big roaring monster, a bowl of mushroom stew. They die together in that cave, sick, exhausted, believing they were recovering. And the world doesn't even let them rest. Over time, the cave absorbs them. Their bodies merge into a single pillar of sap jutting out of the rock, their final resting place fossilized into something half organic, half artifact. Glowing spores from the very mushrooms that killed them drift down and grow into a tiny grove at the pillar's base, circling Julian's body in his journal like a nature's last attempt at a cruel consolation prize. So when you stumble into that cave as the 33rd expedition, you aren't just finding bones or gear or an old campsite. You're looking at the final moment of a group who made one small mistake, one desperate guess, and died because this world punishes hope as harshly as fear. Expedition 59 didn't die fighting. They didn't die lost. They died believing they were about to get better, and the cave remembers. Alright, that's been a bit too much about depression and death. Let's talk about the cutest thing in the game. Monaco. Not the Gestrel party member, the real Monaco. The dog. If you go to Sandfall's official team page, scroll all the way to the bottom past the programmers and the animators and the cinematic crew, you'll hit one last staff entry. A photo of a dog. Title: Happiness Manager. Favorite games: eating wood and chasing broomsticks. It's not a joke profile hidden in HTML, it's part of the real staff list. Wikipedia repeats it. News outlets quote it. Monaco is an actual member of Sandfall Interactive with a real job title and everything. And here's the fun part. The direction of the inspiration goes the opposite way from what most people assume. The character Monaco in the game, the Gestrel with the huge personality and the enthusiasm of a one-man cheering squad, is named after the dog, not the other way around. The gamer ran a whole piece about it. OpenCritic mentions it. FandomWire calls it out in passing. Even the game itself winks at you. There's a hidden shrine room dedicated to Monaco, and if you compare the dog in the shrine to the team page, it's the same face, same dog, same happiness manager. And the name itself has its own tiny layer of trivia. A community post floating around Facebook, echoed later in Reddit threads, explains that Monaco's name originally came from the Swedish energy drink Nocco. Someone turned Nocco into Monaco as a joke. The name stuck, and now it's a full studio mascot, a credited staff member, and the inspiration for one of the game's most beloved characters. Inside one manor, players even started calling the in-game versions Monaco III and Nocco, turning the energy drink joke into a full in-universe bloodline. So the chain is simple but perfect. A can of Nocco inspires the real dog's name, the real dog becomes the office happiness manager, and the in-game Monaco is then named in his honor. A tiny thread of real-world joy woven into a world otherwise built on grief, loss, and collapsing art. It's one of the few parts of the game where the corruption stops, the canvas stands still, and Sandfall lets a little bit of their studio's real heart show through. The broken city, the sick painting, the glitching world comes from one quiet moment early in development when the team still didn't know what the heart of the story was. They had the setting, they had the painterly concept, they had the idea of a world shaped by a brush, but they didn't know why it should matter. And during that uncertainty, Guillaume Broche asked his mother the simplest question on earth. What's the worst thing a person can go through? She didn't hesitate. Losing a child. That answer landed so sharply that the entire story pivoted around it. Jennifer Svedberg-Yen has talked about this moment as the missing key that unlocked everything. Once the theme clarified, the narrative wasn't just a magical painting world anymore. It became a story about grief so deep that it warps reality. The canvas stopped being a backdrop and became a refusal to let go. Aline Descendra stopped being an abstract divine paintress and became a mother drowning in her loss, hiding inside her son's artwork because the real world asks her to move on, and she can't. And that's where Svedberg-Yen's earlier writing slid into place. She already had a private story she'd written years before, about a girl stepping inside a painting to save her mother. Suddenly, it wasn't just thematically aligned. It was the skeleton the whole world had been missing. The girl became Alicia, reborn in the canvas as Maëlle. The lost mother became Aline. The older figure trying to break the painting open became Renoir, helplessly watching the woman he loves vanish into a world made of denial. And Verso, the child the canvas can't let go of, became the emotional hinge that connects the entire family's tragedy. The lore wasn't tacked on. It spilled directly out of that one question Broche asked. From that point on, everything in the story reinforces that emotional core. Gustave's early death isn't a twist for the shock value. It's the first time the player feels the same wounds the Descendres have lived with for years. Verso's nature as a fragment of a dead child makes the world building itself an expression of loss. And the final choice is built on the same axis. Either preserve the painted fantasy of reunion and let Maëlle follow Aline into self-destruction, or destroy the painting so the real Descendre family can finally start healing even though it means losing everyone you've come to love. There's nothing accidental about the emotional architecture. The canvas exists because of a real mother's fear. The expeditions march because of the grief that worlds are built on. And every moment of beauty in Lemire comes with the knowledge that someone is refusing to accept reality to keep that beauty alive. The question the story leaves you with isn't whether the world can be saved. It's whether love can survive loss, and whether holding on is an act of devotion or the most painful way of refusing to live. Some characters in Clair Obscur feel like they were painted straight into the canvas for this story. Others feel older, like they walked in from a different game and refused to leave. Maëlle and Lune are in that second category. Remember We Lost? That first steampunk version of the project with Victorian England, zombies and aliens that got scrapped after 6 months when investors told Broche to think bigger? Almost everything from that build was thrown out, but the dev notes make one thing clear. Maëlle and Lune survived. The team kept those two from the We Lost era and then reassessed their design and personalities to fit the new Belle Epoque, Paintress, and Gommage vision. You can feel that in how central they become once Clair Obscur takes shape. Maëlle is rewritten into the hidden main character of the whole story, the girl who turns out to be Alicia Descendre and quietly carries the final decision about the canvas on her shoulders. Lune becomes the expedition scholar and navigator, her whole identity wrapped up in her parents' research and her obsession with understanding the paintress instead of just killing her. And in the background, composer Lorient Testard talks about the themes and musical sketches that date back to the We Lost days being reused and recontextualized in Expedition 33. which means Mael and Lune had musical DNA in the project before the Belle Epoque world even existed. So while the old steampunk setting is gone, those two are the fault line running through the game's history. They're proof that Clair Obscur wasn't born in one clean stroke, but repainted on top of an older canvas, with Mael and Lune standing there in both versions, waiting for the final story to catch up to them. Let's talk about Gustave a little. Going through Act 1, the voice for Gustave seemed a little too familiar to me. So when I checked the voice cast for the game, I was completely blown away. Because for a brand new studio on its first game, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 landed an unusually high-profile English cast, and Charlie Cox and Andy Serkis are the clearest symbols of that. The Daredevil guy and Gollum walk into a French grief-soaked JRPG and decide to stay. Charlie Cox, who most people know as Marvel's Daredevil, is the English voice of Gustave, your Act 1 decoy protagonist and emotional entry point into the story. He has openly admitted in Q&As that he's not really a gamer, that he was in the booth for just a few hours, did the lines and went home, only to wake up months later and find out people are calling it one of the best performances in the genre. He keeps saying he feels like a fraud because the session felt so short, while the writers and fans are over here crying about Gustave on their third playthrough and getting his name tattooed on their souls. Polygon and others have covered how he still hasn't properly played the game, has misidentified characters at cons, and is now at the stage where he is signing Expedition 33 boxes like, "I promise I'll actually play this someday." Meanwhile, Svedberg Yen has quietly confirmed that it was more like a full working day in the booth, and praised how fast and clean he worked under pressure, which is why Gustave's early scenes hit as hard as they do. The man doesn't even know the amount of efficiency he's delivering. I mean, what an absolute Chad. On the other side of the story, you have Andy Serkis as Renoir de Sandre, the exhausted curator father quietly waging war on the canvas from the inside. The official cast reveal describes Renoir as a man driven by ruthless determination and deep loss, and Serkis leans into that hard. Fans on the Expedition 33 subreddit have entire threads just about his delivery in the late game, pointing out how he plays both versions of Renoir with a different nuance, and how one sigh in a single word like enough can carry decades of grief. This is the guy who changed how everyone thought about performance capture with Gollum and Caesar, now bringing that same broken, trembling intensity to a father trying to erase a world he helped create just to save the woman he loves. The funny part is how casual both of them are about it. Cox keeps saying he only worked 4 hours and doesn't deserve the praise, even as the game racks up awards and his name shows up on Game of the Year nomination lists. Serkis pops up in cast promos talking calmly about Renoir's determination, while players are online writing essays about how his final scenes emotionally destroyed them. Absolute chads. Some people in this project feel like stars because their names are on the box. And then you have secret MVPs, the ones whose fingerprints are on everything, even if most players never read their credits. Maxence Cazorla is absolutely one of those. On paper, he is just Eski's voice. In reality, he is practically woven into the spine of the whole game. Cast lists and databases all line him up as Eski and Clair Obscur, and that would already be neat on its own. But the really fun part is that he does it twice. Dutch Comic Con's Quest bio spells it out very clearly. He voices Eski in both the English and French versions. Same actor, 2 languages. Same unhinged little chaos creature delivered with perfect energy in either dub. Fans picked up on that detail fast. There's a whole Reddit appreciation post pointing out that yes, that is still Maxence in both languages, and that he also sneaks into the Lumiere choir as a singer, which means he is literally in your ears even when he's not talking. And then you look at what else he does and it gets even better. That same convention bio and follow-up interviews list him as one of the main motion and performance capture actors on the project. He is in the suit for Gustave. He is in the suit for Verso. He is in the suit for Renoir. So when you watch Gustave stumble through the snow, or Verso move with that mix of uncertainty and immortal wariness, or Renoir drag himself through another impossible confrontation, a lot of that physicality is Cazorla. Eski, the Goblin Archivist with way too much energy, is voiced by the same person who physically is 3 of the most important men in the story. And because this is Sandfall, of course that wasn't enough. On top of all that performance capture and dual language voice work, he also joins the choir for Lumiere's music alongside other members of the team, including Guillaume Broche himself. So you have one guy who is embodying the protagonist, the immortal mystery, the grieving father, the little creature who guards the law, and then showing up in the background to help sing the city into existence. It is very on brand for this game. You have famous names like Charlie Cox and Andy Serkis front and center, and right behind them there is Maxence Corzola, quietly doing half the emotional heavy lifting, voicing your favorite weird little archivist in 2 languages, and literally stepping into the bodies of the characters who define the story. If Lumiere feels alive, it is partly because one actor spent a lot of time in a mocap suit making sure everyone in this collapsing painting moved like a real person. Early on, most of the marketing for Clair Obscur focused on the English cast. Trailers, headlines, previews, all talking about Charlie Cox, Andy Serkis, Ben Starr. And for a lot of people, that was exciting. But for French players, watching a very French game from a very French studio being sold almost entirely through its English voices got old fast. Producer Francois Maurice has said some people were even pissed. Social media and comments kept asking the same thing. Where's the French dub? Is there a French dub? Are you seriously making the Frenchest JRPG ever and not talking about the French voices? Inside Sandfall, the team had already planned that dub. It wasn't missing, it just wasn't front and center in the messaging yet. So instead of doing a calm blog post saying, yeah, of course there's a French audio, they decided to answer the frustration in the most ridiculous way possible. If people wanted proof this was a French game, they would get it in the loudest, silliest form imaginable. That is where the Baguette trailer comes from. First step, they locked in the cast. Alexandre Gillet as Gustave, Adeline Chataille as Maëlle, Celine Mayul as Lune, Sarah Cornebert as Ciel, Féodor Atkin as Renoir, Slimane Yafar as Verso, Bruno Magni and Maxence Cazorla in supporting roles. A stacked French lineup that absolutely justified a big reveal. Then they wrapped that serious announcement in the most self-aware joke they could think of. Someone pitched the idea of outfits that lean into every French stereotype at once. Striped shirts, red berets, mimes, props shaped like baguettes. Lead character artist Alan was asked about his inspiration for these costumes, and his entire official quote on the blog was just, "I like bread." That line went straight into the post and became the mission statement for the whole thing. On October 23rd, 2024, they pushed the button. The blog went up under the title Clair Obscur Expedition 33 Baguette Trailer, and the trailer hit YouTube and the PlayStation channels at the same time. Anyone who clicked expecting a solemn voice cast presentation instead got the party sprinting around Lumiere wearing parody French skins, posing with baguettes and looking like they had escaped from a tourism poster designed by a chaos demon. Only afterwards did Maurice and lead programmer Tom Guillermin break down what happened. The trailer wasn't some long-term plan. It was a self-joking way of responding to the early backlash, a bit of over-the-top fun that let them say yes, the French dub is real, and also yes, we are aware of how French this whole project looks from the outside. Some of the best moments in Clair Obscur weren't even meant to exist. They weren't written, they weren't planned, they just happened. Two of them became so iconic that players quote them like they were always in the script, but behind the scenes they were born out of pure human instinct in the mocap room. Take Sophie's prologue. You know the moment. Gustave trying to smile through panic. Sophie trying to be brave even though the number has already called her name. She says, "I know," once, calm and steady. And then she says it again, softer, thinner, like she's holding onto composure with her fingernails. It's the line that breaks people on every playthrough. Except here's the wild part. That second "I know" was never in the script. Sophie's performance capture actor Estelle Denault, who, by the way, is also the mocap for Ciel, Aline, Alicia, and the Paintress, and voices several of them in French, added it in on the spot. She talked about it in a short behind-the-scenes clip, explaining why she felt Sophie would repeat herself in that moment. Just a tiny instinct in the middle of a take. Sandfall shoots all their story scenes with full performance capture first, and when they reviewed the footage, that second "I know" hit harder than anything on the page. So they kept it, and now it's the emotional heartbeat of the entire prologue, A small, unscripted breath that makes Sophie feel real in the final moments of her life. Honestly, I completely missed this detail the first time, and knowing it was improvised, it hurts even more. And then there's the perfect opposite. The scene that's funny in the strangest, quietest way. Verso agreeing to take Monaco on the expedition. Just 3 words. Good, good, good. Deadpan, awkward. But so full of character that the fandom basically adopted it as a personality trait.
That's true. There will be a lot of fights.
Exactly.
Count me in then.
Good.
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 Yes, good.
That moment? Also improv. Maxence Cazorla, who voices Esky in both English and French and does mocap for Gustave, Verso and Renoir, was in the volume with Guillaume Broche, who was performing Monaco. They started riffing a little campfire recruitment exchange, totally unscripted, just playing with the idea of Monaco being way too intense and Verso being way too tired to deal with it. In the behind-the-scenes teaser, Cazorla posted on X and Instagram. You can see them cracking up between takes. The dev commentary over the clip even calls it one random improv that turned into an iconic Monaco moment. The funniest part, for me personally, is how perfectly these 2 improvised beats frame the tone of the entire game. And then, somehow, after all of that, this little 30-person French studio with a grieving mother JRPG, a dog as the happiness manager, and a marketing stunt built around baguettes, turned into one of the biggest sleeper hits in years. And I genuinely mean sleeper hit in the real sense. A game nobody expected to explode the way it did. When the numbers started rolling in, it felt unreal. 500,000 copies in the first 24 hours. 1 million in 3 days. Then 2 million in under 2 weeks. Then 3.3 million in 33 days. And that's not even counting Game Pass players, which is insane when you think about it. Brand new IP. A dark French art RPG, from a studio that literally had 1 visual effects artist. I remember refreshing the charts thinking, no way this is real. No way this game is hitting these numbers. But it kept climbing. Steam told the same story. Launch day already peaked over 50,000 concurrents, which is already huge for a turn-based RPG. And then it just kept going. 87,000, 120,000. 145,000 according to SteamDB's all-time peak. That's the part that blew my mind. Seeing this moody, painterly grief opera overtaking Metaphor, Ren Fantasio, Assassin's Creed Shadows, Divinity Original Sin 2, even The Witcher 3's average peaks. You could almost hear the collective, "Wait, what?" across the industry. And honestly, it felt deserved. This wasn't hype manufactured by a massive publisher. This was word-of-mouth chaos. People finishing the prologue going, "Oh God," and immediately telling 5 other people to play it. Reviewers put it at the very top of the year, a legit 91 to 93 on Metacritic depending on platform, a 92 average on OpenCritic, 97% critic recommendation, and the user scores 9.7, 9.8. Steam's overwhelmingly positive with over 100,000 reviews. Critics and players agreeing this hard almost never happens. When it does, it's because a game hits something real. Even the physical copies went nuts. The Lumiere edition sold out basically everywhere. The collector's edition vanished so fast the site had to mark it gone in both the US and Europe, and GameStop had to restock theirs after the first batch evaporated. Standard PS5 and Series X copies became little local treasures for months. You could feel collectors deciding in real time that this game was going on their shelf next to their long-term favorites. And yeah, I absolutely grabbed the Lumiere edition the second I could. No shame. And this, to me, is why Expedition 33 hits different. It's not just good. It's not just beautiful. It's a miracle of focus. A team with something to say, saying it clearly, and players immediately recognizing the honesty in it. The grief, the beauty, the painted world falling apart, the improvised lines that feel too human to be scripted. All of it builds to something special. This game earned every bit of its success, and I love seeing a studio this small, this sincere, and this wonderfully strange get the win they deserve. You know what kills me about Expedition 33? The very first secret in the game isn't tucked behind a boss or hidden in some late-game ruin. It's sitting right next to Lumiere's port, in the most innocent place imaginable. a lonely trash can wedged between the painter NPC and that tiny outdoor music stage, which is perfect because that whole harbour square is designed as your safe welcome to Lemire area. Vendors, kids running around, people chatting. A peaceful morning in a city that has no idea it's about to lose everyone aged 33 and up. And in the middle of all that breezy Belle Epoque charm sits the trash can. At first, it looks like any other bit of scenery. Honestly, I walked past it the first time thinking, cute prop. But then the text starts acting suspicious. It is just a trash can. It is indeed a perfectly normal trash can. Once again, a perfectly normal. At that point, the game is practically screaming, press the button you little gremlin, do it. So when you finally give in and keep tapping, the bin shouts back. A man pops out. An actual man. Trash can man. Living inside the thing like he's waiting out the apocalypse. And here's the part that shifts the whole tone. He's hiding in that bin because this exact morning is his 33rd birthday. He is convinced that if he buries himself deep enough in garbage, the painteress won't notice he exists. He whispers at you to leave, begs you to not attract attention. He even hands over a chroma catalyst because something keeps poking him and he's too scared to investigate it. And it all hits harder because of where it's happening. Right in Lemire's very first public square. Right in the place that's supposed to make you feel safe. Right at the foot of that giant monolith whose number is about to tick down from 34 to 33. Trash Can Man lives here specifically because this location is the heart of the city. People stroll by, children play, musicians warm up. It's the least threatening place in the entire prologue, and he still believes he's about to die. And you know who's standing beside him? Gustave, age 32, 1 year behind him. One man joining an expedition to fight fate. One man hiding in garbage hoping fate won't see him. Same world, same number. Two completely different answers to the same fear. And because Sandfall loves pain, the game even remembers this moment hours later. If you met him at the start, returning to that same trash can near the port at the end of the game gets you a stronger upgrade or a note. Or worse, nothing at all. And suddenly you're back where everything began, staring into a trash can and quietly wondering whether that terrified stranger got erased, escaped, or simply stopped hoping he could outrun the number. It's funny. It's tragic. You know, there is another JRPG reference that made me smile ear to ear and think about all the JRPGs I've played. The 9,999 damage cap. Nothing screams JRPG heritage louder than a big, satisfying 9999 plastered across the screen like the universe is politely saying, that's enough violence for today. And Clair Obscur leans all the way into this tradition. All through early game and right into mid-Act 2, no matter how hard you pump your stats, no matter how beautifully you line up your buffs, your biggest single hit crits still smack right into that 9999 glass ceiling. You can feel the game smirking, like it knows exactly what it's doing. JRPG players have been trained for decades to recognize that number as the mark of maximum power, even though half your build isn't even awake yet. And then the game pulls the classic JRPG move. It hands you the key to the forbidden numbers. Right after that massive Act 2 story boss of the monolith, the moment the narrative takes its big turn, you earn the Picto-painted power. Equip it, drag it through 4 battles, and the thing blooms into a Lumina. And once you activate that Lumina, the cap is gone. Suddenly, 9,999 is the warm-up hit. Tens of thousands show up like it's nothing. Stack your effects right and you can start breaking damage numbers like it's the PS2 era all over again. When every JRPG insisted that the real game begins when you exceed the number the screen was never designed to hold. The moment I broke the first 6-digit crit, I felt the exact same rush I had the first time I overflowed the damage counter in Final Fantasy X with break damage limit, or when I discovered how absurdly high you can scale attacks in Tales of the Abyss if you stop being polite and start being unhinged. Clair Obscur doesn't just nod at that lineage, it recreates that old school JRPG ritual. First, they limit you, so later they can show you what you were always capable of. The game is constantly balancing painterly elegance with pure JRPG chaos, and the 9,999 cap is the perfect bridge between the two. It's the moment you realize Expedition 33 isn't pretending to be an art game with RPG mechanics stapled on. It's a true JRPG at heart, complete with that sacred rite of passage where you finally scroll a damage number across the screen so rude the canvas itself should file a complaint. When you walk down that path beside the chief's house in Gestrel Village, you're not meant to miss him. A house is burning, flames swallowing the structure, and a Gestrel just sits there inside it, completely unfazed. When you talk to him, he doesn't scream or beg for help or panic. He just calmly says, "This is fine," as if nothing around him is wrong. It's easy at first to read it as a joke, because it's a very intentional reference to the internet-famous comic where a cartoon dog sits in a burning room pretending everything is normal. The game mirrors that same tone. Everything's on fire, everything's obviously collapsing, and yet the character acts like acknowledging it would somehow make it worse. It makes you smile because you recognize it instantly. It feels playful and out of place. But moments later, the joke shifts into something heavier. That quiet acceptance becomes a reflection of Gestrel life. Gestrels live in a world where danger isn't sudden, it's constant. They fight in arenas like disposable performers. They're treated as lesser beings. They've grown up with fear, violence, and the looming threat of erasure as part of daily life. When horror lasts long enough, it stops feeling shocking. It becomes ordinary. That's exactly what this burning house Gestrel represents. The normalization of catastrophe. Instead of fleeing, fixing, or even questioning the fire, he does what so many characters in Expedition 33 do. He adapts by pretending everything is okay. His numbness isn't stupidity, it's fatigue. It's resignation. It's survival. Placed right before the arena path, it hits even harder. You're about to walk into a space where Gestrels fight because the system demands entertainment, not because they want to. His presence before that arena is almost like a quiet warning. Things have been broken for so long here that even suffering feels routine. Let's look at one of the game's biggest twists, because this man pulled off one of the funniest, saddest JRPG twists I've seen in years. And the game sticks it right in your face from hour one, knowing full well you won't catch it until much later. Early on, you meet this stern, wise, slightly grumpy old mentor who acts like he walks straight out of Final Fantasy XII, with a lifetime of trauma and a pension plan. He talks like your dad. He scolds you like a principal. He stands heroic and immovable, the perfect guardian of the painter. Except, he's fake. Completely fake. And I love how the game plays this so straight that most of us don't even blink. That older Renoir is not Renoir having a bad decade. He's not tired, he's not aged, he's not world-weary. He is literally a construct. A fabricated Renoir created to look like the wise old protector Renoir wishes he could be. A mask with a beard. The real Renoir? You meet him later and he's younger, angrier, rawer, and 10 times more interesting. He's not a serene guardian. He's a man drowning in guilt and clinging to the canvas like it's the only part of his family he hasn't lost. And once you know the truth, every early scene becomes unintentionally hilarious. The old Renoir's basically, "I have lived long and seen much," while the real Renoir, off-screen probably, is like, "Mate, you're 3 weeks old and made of paint." Old Renoir's stiffness suddenly makes sense too. Of course he seems unnatural. He's acting. He's performing a personality that Renoir thinks a proper leader should have. He's supposed to be calm, unshakable, authoritative. Basically the dad version Renoir wishes he could become if he weren't busy waging a cold war on a cosmic painting. What makes the twist sting is that storytelling detail. Old Renoir isn't malicious. He's not lying to you on purpose. He's a manifestation of Renoir's fear. He's the safe distance Renoir builds so he never has to confront what he really feels. About Aline, about Alicia, about himself. It's a coping mechanism brought to life. And when that illusion drops, you finally meet the real man's behind the mask. Guilty, exhausted, terrified of losing what little he has left. Not a general, not a guardian, just a father trying and failing to survive his grief. Honestly, this twist made me rewatch every single early scene, and suddenly the whole tone flips from mentor NPC to, oh god, he couldn't even face us as himself. It's peak clair-obscur storytelling. Strange, theatrical, heartbreaking, and quietly human. It's such a JRPG move too. The wise old mentor who is secretly not real trope is straight out of the genre's emotional playbook. But Sandfall twists it in a way I've never seen before. Instead of a villain controlling a puppet, It's a man creating a version of himself he can bear to be. If the Expedition 59 mushroom stew wasn't bleak enough, the lore behind Neverons takes it to a whole different level. Because those things weren't always out there prowling the continent. They didn't even exist when the canvas was first created. They're not natural monsters at all. They're the fallout of a family war. Neverons only show up later, when Clea Desandra joins the fight between her parents. In the real world, Clea finds the painted version of herself that Aline made inside the canvas. A portrait daughter, painted Clea, idolized, simplified, locked into how her mother thinks she should be. Clea takes one look at that and is absolutely disgusted. It's not her, it's some polished, frozen idea of her. So she does something brutal. She kidnaps her own painted self. Lore and community breakdowns explain that Clea literally abducts painted Clea out of an old Lumiere and drags her up to the Flying Manor, away from the rest of the family and outside Aline's day-to-day influence. And there, in that isolated space, she repaints herself. Not metaphorically, literally. She paints over Aline's version, burning away the colour, turning painted Clea into this monochrome, scorched-looking figure whose will and personality are basically erased. And then she gives her a job. Forever. As part of that repainting, Clea hardwires a new purpose into her canvas self. Draw Neverons. Endlessly. No questions, no choice. Just production. A lot of lore discussions describe it as Clea condemning painted Clea to eternal labour. Trapped in the manor, forced to churn out one Neveron after another for decades. She is no longer a daughter or even a character. She's a living factory. Every Neveron you fight is a product of that punishment. Those sketch-born creatures are then deployed all over the continent to harass expeditions, kill explorers, and intercept chroma before it can flow back to Aline. The more chroma they steal and corrupt out in the wild, the weaker the paintress becomes, and the more of stalemate tips towards Renoir's side. So when you're out there on the battlefield, dodging and parrying Neverons like they're just another enemy type, the lore quietly says, this is Clea using a hollowed-out version of herself as a weapon against her own mother. By the time you reach the Flying Manor in Act 3 and meet that remade monochrome Clea, that's who you're looking at. The overwritten canvas self, Clea shackled to a drawing desk at the edge of the world, condemned to keep creating monsters so the war can go on. No freedom, no rest, no real identity left. Morally, it's one of the darkest things in the whole story. Everyone talks about Aline refusing to let go, Renoir trying to erase an entire world, Alicia being torn between them. But Clea's choice sits right beside those. She weaponizes her own reflection, strips it of agency, and locks it into endless work, just to keep feeding the Neveron war. Some expeditions in Clair Obscur are legends, some are tragedies, and some are quiet little miracles whose work you only notice if you stop long enough to look at the walls. Expedition 69 is one of those. In the lore, they're known as the Climbers Expedition. While most expeditions marched out with a clear reach the monolith, kill the paintress objective, 69's mission was different from the start. They weren't sent to be heroes, they were sent to be support, pure recon. Their job was to map the continent and literally bolt safer routes into it for whoever came next. All those climbing holds you casually grab, those neat little anchors and handholds that make scaling cliffs feel built for you, diegetically, that's Expedition 69. The game quietly credits them as the ones who set up most of the routes you use. Every time you climb a wall in some horrible canyon and think, thanks level design, the story is actually whispering, thanks Fluer and Anthony. Fluer is the one whose voice you actually get to hear in game. Her journal in Joy Vale, deep in the Visage's caverns, introduces her as a mountaineer who just wants to finish this mission and get back to her climbing team. She's professional, upbeat, focused on the job. She talks about how 69's assignment is just recon, and how some members chafe at that, but she keeps insisting their work will pay off in the long run, because they're literally laying the trail for the ones who come after. It's such a perfect echo of the main Expedition 33 theme, fighting and working for those who come after, but filtered through a smaller lens. No talk of destiny, no big speeches, just a climber tightening bolts in a cave, convinced that making someone else's path a bit safer is worth her life. Anthony is the other named member. Fluer writes about him upgrading all the grips and handholds, making them easier to install and nicer to use. It's such a mundane detail and I love it. The game is out here throwing cosmic grief wars at you, and in the middle of that, someone is worrying about ergonomics for future climbers. Her last entry is heartbreaking in how normal it sounds. She says they're setting the last few handholds tomorrow, and then they hope to get out of the caverns and see the sun again. You know, because they're deep underground in visages and this is just another job to finish before going home. Except you, the player, already know from other lore that Expedition 69 never made it out. They all died on Visage's Island. No triumphant return, no glorious report, no statues in Lumiere. Just flags, anchors, and journals left behind. And you can still see their traces. Flags stuck in rock faces. Routes that feel too carefully planned to be natural. All those little signs that someone was here before you, sweating on the same holds, trying to make the climb survivable for whoever would follow. For a game that loves breaking your heart with quiet little tragedies, nothing hits me harder than the expeditions you never even meet. The ghosts whose footprints you're literally standing on. And two of the biggest ones, the real hidden MVPs of the entire world, are Expedition 70 and Expedition 67. Expedition 70 gave you handholds in the monolith itself. Yeah, they actually made it inside. Inside. One of the only recorded expeditions in Lumiere's history to breach that impossible space before the paintress raised her barrier around it. And the most heartbreaking part? They didn't get further than we do. They didn't kill the paintress. They didn't return home. And they left you their last gift. Literal grapple points and climbing anchors embedded in the walls of the monolith, so that whoever came next wouldn't die before even reaching the second platform. All of your big heroic traversal moments in Expedition 33, you owe those to a team you only know through a single journal written by Charlotte, the only named member we have on record. There's something brutally poetic about it. Your party storms the monolith believing they're the first to ever get this close, and the walls quietly whisper back, no, someone else struggled here first. Someone had to die here so you could get this far. Then there's Expedition 67, the Explosive Expedition, the team that did the JRPG equivalent of rage-quitting the dungeon walls into submission. 67 was the first group to ever reach Axon Serene's island. When they hit a dead end, they didn't go around it. They didn't take notes. They didn't try diplomacy. They blew the island open. The journals talk about using all their explosives to blast tunnels into the heart of Serene's territory, carving out the route that becomes your path toward the Colosseum. They're the reason there's even a way into her lair that isn't a death sentence. Luke, who keeps the journal, writes this the same tone as someone logging camping notes. Meanwhile, Marguerite is the one who figures out what's happening. That Serene doesn't just charm you. She floods your brain with emphatic distress, overwhelming your emotions until you stop thinking entirely. And that's exactly how they die. No final stand, no last battle. They just stay, sit down, let the melody wash over them, and never get up again. For me, that's one of the most haunting deaths in the entire lore. No violence, just a kind of emotional drowning. Both 67 and 70 get labelled as failed missions in Lumiere's official records, which feels obscenely unfair. Because without 67's blast routes and 70's grapples, Expedition 33 literally cannot reach half the places it needs to go. They're the definition of the game's main theme. You walk paths built by the dead. Every journal tells you this in some form. Every expedition lays the trail for the ones who come after. Some do it with maps, some with sacrifices, some with violence, some with anchors hammered into the wall of the final tower. And that's what I love about the world. Even the expeditions you never meet still matter. They shape the land, they carve the routes. They die so someone else can climb 1 meter higher than they did. There's one rule in Expedition 33's world that hits harder than any boss fight, any reveal, any family twist. And it's not a monster, not a curse, not a villain you can punch. It's a number. Once a year, the paintress steps up to the monolith and writes a single number. Just one. And everyone whose age matches that number, gone. Instantly. No body, no remains, no goodbyes. Just smoke where a person used to be. The gommage isn't death. It's erasure. It doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care what you've done. It doesn't care if you're asleep, at work, mid-conversation, or hiding in a trash can hoping nobody notices you. If the number matches your age, that's it. This year was your year. And the worst part? Everyone knows exactly which age is next. The monolith displays the countdown like some cosmic middle finger, and the entire continent organizes its life around that ticking clock. Birthdays aren't celebrations here, they're warnings. You look at the monolith and measure your life not by how long you've lived, but by how many numbers are left until the one that will erase you. Middle-aged people don't exist. Grandparents don't exist. The oldest person you'll ever meet is someone who's a few years behind the next number. And society just functions around this horror. Parents plan families knowing their kids may vanish in their 20s or 30s. Expeditions are staffed with sacrifice generations, people already close to their gommage age, who figure, if I'm doomed anyway, I might as well try to break the cycle. Some people throw themselves into pleasure, some cling to denial, some build entire coping rituals, some, like our old friend Trash Can Man, genuinely believe they can hide from a concept. Meanwhile, the paintress never has to enforce anything. She doesn't need soldiers or guards or patrols. The fear of that yearly number does all the work for her. People police themselves because time is the enemy and there's no outrunning it. And then there's Gustav. Gustav doesn't join Expedition 33 because he's a chosen hero. He joins because he's 32 and he knows, down to the hour, that he will vanish the moment that monolith ticks from 34 to 33. The gommage doesn't give him a dramatic battle or a last stand. It will just erase him, cleanly, quietly, like he never existed. So he goes on the expedition not to save the world, but to save anyone, even if it's just the next generation, from suffering the same stupid mechanical fate. And once you start noticing it, the absence becomes more haunting than the presence. You realize there are no old people in this world. None. Entire aesthetics, communities, histories, all shaped by the fact that nobody survives long enough to become elderly. That's why the world feels so young, why rebellion is everywhere, why grief is carved into every NPC's dialogue. It's not just background lore, it's the skeleton key for understanding everything. Every expedition, every character choice, every act of courage, cowardice, hope, or despair. Because in this world, the scariest threat isn't a monster, it's your next birthday. Let's talk about a tragic character, Simon. The character almost nobody talks about until they meet him, and afterwards they can't stop thinking about him. Simon isn't a villain. He isn't a monster. He isn't even someone who made a catastrophic mistake. He's just a person. A person who loved Clea. A person who thought he had life. A person who believed he was real. In old Lumiere, Simon lived the kind of life people envy in this world. Stable, warm, harmless. He had a fiancée, a home, a future. He made plans, little ordinary plans, the kind humans build their whole meaning on. Breakfasts, work routines, walking home together at dusk, growing old side by side. And then the truth cut through all that like a blade. He learned he was painted, constructed, temporary. A man made from someone else's grief, living in a city that never actually existed in the way he thought. When that truth hit, Simon didn't die. Not in the physical sense. Something worse happened. His entire timeline collapsed. The past he cherished, fabricated. The future he counted on, cancelled. The relationship that shaped him, built on the illusion of a mother trying to rewrite her own tragedy. That moment, Simon's unraveling, is the purest embodiment of we lost. Not we were defeated, not we failed an objective, but the quieter, heavier kind of loss. We lost what could have been. We lost the life we thought we were living. We lost the version of ourselves we believed was real. When you meet him again as the superboss, he doesn't greet you with rage or melodrama. Simon's fight doesn't feel like a duel. It feels like walking into someone else's unfinished story and realizing you're standing in the ruins of a person. He fights like someone who never wanted to learn how. His ferocity isn't pride, it's grief exploding through muscle memory. Every hit feels like a question he can't stop asking. What am I now? What do I do with the life I never actually had? Why did the world move on without me? He's powerful because pain has nowhere else to go. He's silent because there is nothing left to say. And when you finally defeat him, the victory lands wrong. Beautifully wrong. It doesn't spike adrenaline. It doesn't make you cheer. It drops your heart right through your ribs. Because Simon isn't a boss you conquer. He's a sorrow you witness. A man who loves someone who wasn't really him. a future husband who never got a wedding, a citizen of a city that never fully existed, a casualty not of war, but of narrative, collateral damage in the conflict between Aline and Renoir. Simon stands as the game's quiet thesis. Some people don't get catharsis, some stories don't get closure, some lives don't break, they simply stop. And that's why he hurts so much, because you walk away knowing he deserved a normal ending, the kind he dreamed of. And the canvas, the gommage, the family war, the paint, all of it stole that from him. He isn't a monster, he isn't a hero, he isn't a villain. He's just someone who lost everything he was supposed to be. And that might be the most human tragedy in the entire game. The Flying Manor is already one of the strangest places in Clair Obscur. It is Claire's drifting fortress, a house torn out of the world and left afloat in the sky, full of locked rooms, distorted corridors, and paintings that feel like they are watching your back. It's the part of the game where the canvas stops pretending to be a normal landscape and just fully commits to being a haunted mind palace. Sometimes the manor feels less like a level and more like a confession. It keeps pretending you have seen everything, and then, if you are stubborn enough, it quietly admits there is one more layer under the floorboards. On your first walkthrough, that space simply is not there. You clear the manor, move on, and never know what you missed. It only becomes accessible later if you solve this weird little object rotation puzzle in the kitchen. Twist the statue the right way, turn the smaller candelabra on the table, rotate a pan on the wall, get the orientations lined up, and suddenly a crack opens near the grandfather clock, like the house itself just admitted it was hiding something from you. Drop through and you end up in a basement corridor blocked with wooden crates. Smash them, find a crawl space, follow the stairs up, and at the top is this tiny storage room that is technically useless. No loot, no enemies, no progression, just an empty looking space and a single framed painting on the wall. And then you look closer and realize what you are actually seeing. It's the Sandfall team, the real devs, painted in the same style as every other portrait in the manor, so it feels just like another family image at first. But it's actually the core crew, plus Monaco planted right at the front like the studio mascot he is. The world inside the painting is fiction, but the faces in this one frame are not. The creators literally painted themselves into their own creation. I really love how quietly this ties into everything the game has been saying. The manor is all about layers of authorship, painters painting people, people repainting each other, canvases rewriting reality, and tucked away in a hidden room that most players will never see is the ultimate meta version of that idea. The real-world painters step inside their own painted world, not as a quest marker, not as a lore drop, just as a soft little thank you to anyone curious enough to keep poking at walls and turning props that do not look important. It fits perfectly with the rest of Clair Obscur. The game keeps rewarding you for treating the world like a real place, for assuming there is a meaning tucked in every corner. Sometimes that meaning is a tragic journal, sometimes it's a terrified man in a trash can, and sometimes it's a secret room where the people who built the entire nightmare smile out at you from a frame and silently say, "We're here too." Check this one out, because you might have missed this one. In Expedition 33, Mael has a missable weapon in the Gestrel arena, a moment that feels like Sandfall secretly tipping their hat to every old-school JRPG trick you've ever fallen for, and it's their best weapon in the game. Here's the part the game never tells you plainly. If Mael doesn't win the very last fight in the Gestrel arena, you lose your early chance at her unique weapon, Medalum. No pop-up, no hint, no party member nudging you, nothing. Just silence and a very big opportunity quietly slipping past you. The Gestrel Arena looks like a fun little diversion when you first step into Gestrel Village. You need to enter the one-on-one tournament to advance the main story. It's the village's way of proving your worth before letting you cross the sea. When you sign up, the game asks you to pick one character. That person fights all 4 rounds alone, no swaps, no tag-ins, no do-overs unless you restart the whole sequence. And if you choose Mael and she wins the 4th match, that's when you get Medalum, her exclusive weapon. But if you pick Gustav, Verso, Ciel, anyone else, or if you pick Mael but she loses before the end, the game smiles politely and simply moves forward with the plot. The arena's done, the story continues, and Mael's one-of-a-kind weapon is gone from your pocket, until the game quietly informs you, many hours later, that the remaining way to get it is to beat Golgra, an endgame boss who hits like a truck filled with smaller trucks. It's vintage JRPG energy. The if you knew, if you didn't, good luck kind of design. What makes Metalum worth the trouble is how deeply it feeds into Mael's kit. It supercharges her burn damage and makes her virtuose stance sing. Suddenly, her whole Spelldancer combat identity sharpens, and you feel like you unlock the version of Mael the devs always imagined. But none of that is communicated. No NPC hints at it, no item preview, no recommended character nudge before you step into the arena. Just a quiet fork in the road disguised as a simple Act 1 challenge. And in a game filled with painterly illusions and secrets hiding behind secrets, it fits perfectly. Expedition 33 loves rewarding curiosity and punishing complacency. Not maliciously, but with that same playful, confident grin as the Trashcan Man or the Floating Manor puzzle rooms. Metalum is the same kind of wink. If you take Mael into the arena, the world opens a little door you didn't know was there. If you don't, well, someday, many hours later, a towering chief will be waiting and Mael will tilt her head like, "So, about my weapon." It's a tiny moment, but it's so Claire obscure. One of the boldest choices Claire Obscure makes isn't a boss, or a twist, or a combat system. It's the decision to just not tell you where to go. No minimap, no quest diamond, no little bar at the top of the screen yelling, "Objective, 32 meters this way." You get a world map and a compass in an overlay if you really need to orientate yourself. But during normal play, the HUD basically shrugs and says, "Figure it out, look around." The director and the interviews keep coming back to the same thing. If they glued a strip of UI to the edge of your vision, you'd stare at that instead of at the ridiculous amount of effort they poured into the arches, streets, cliffs, and lighting. And honestly, they're right. In most open-world games, my eyes are welded to the minimap like it's life support. The flip side is very real though. People do get lost. Those levels are multi-layered, looping, and more vertical than they first look. And without a glowing breadcrumb line, some areas absolutely feel like mazes on a first run. I remember hitting a point in Lumiere where I thought, "Oh cool, I broke the game, I'm stuck." And then 5 minutes later, realizing the actual route was literally one lantern-lit door I hadn't walked through because I assumed it was set dressing. That's where the yellow paint idea quietly kicks in. Instead of slapping bright paint on rocks like God of War or Jedi Fallen Order, Expedition 33 uses light itself as the waypoint system. Floating lanterns, lit lampposts, chains of candles. That one staircase bathed in warm light when the rest of the room is in shadow. That's the game's version of an objective marker. Community answers to "where do I go?" are basically "follow the lamps." Once you notice it, it feels incredibly deliberate. Bright and warm means forward. Dark and tucked away usually means side path with a chest or some lore, then it dead ends. And it fits the whole Claire Obscure thing so well it's almost annoying how clever it is. The entire game is built on light versus dark, harsh contrast, chiaroscuro drama. So of course they turn to light into your invisible guidance system. It's not just pretty mood lighting, it's UI disguised as atmosphere. Level design backs this up with funnels and framing. Narrow tunnels that open into lit landmarks, broken railings only where they want you to drop, sightlines that place that next lantern just off center so you naturally drift toward it without thinking. Do some people bounce off this? Oh yeah. Some reviews are like, love the art, hate feeling lost. And honestly, I get it. Backtracking in a multi-level area with no hard markers can feel like wandering a very pretty IKEA with no exit signs. Sandfall's already said their big thank you update is going to add some quality of life improvements, and I wouldn't be shocked if clearer navigation feedback is on that list. But they've also been careful not to promise a full-blown Ubisoft compass, because that would basically declare defeat on the original design. Personally, I kind of love it. The first few hours were confusing, but once I trained my brain to read the lamps and spotlights as "go here" instead of cool lighting, it finally clicked. I'll be honest with you. Parrying in Claire Obscure nearly broke me. I kept thinking, I swear I pressed it, while getting flattened by basic enemies like I'd never held a controller in my life. I was laser focused on the animations, every wind-up, every flourish, every flashy arc of an attack, and the game just kept punishing me for it. Then it finally clicked. I wasn't supposed to be watching the blade at all. I was supposed to be listening. Once you realize that, the entire combat system flips on its head. Every enemy has a tiny, distinct audio cue right before the actual hit frame. A little whoosh, a crack, a metallic scrape, something your ears pick up more reliably than your eyes ever could. The animations are deceptive on purpose. Delays, feints, flourishes, pauses that trick your visual timing. But the sound cue, that's the real tell. The hit always arrives just after it. The moment I stopped staring at the weapon and started hearing my parries, everything got easier. Not because the game got easier, but because I finally synced with the rhythm of how Sandfall built the system. It suddenly felt less like guessing the frame and more like hitting a beat in a music game. Lower the music volume a bit, clear some space in the audio, and the cue pops right out. Crisp, consistent, learnable. And that's when it dawns on you why everyone stubbornly keeps trying to parry even when they get punished for it. Parry is mathematically better than dodge in almost every situation. Dodging just avoids the hit. Parrying flips the fight in your favor. 0 or reduced damage taken. Posture damage dealt. AP or Lumina gained. Sometimes unique follow-ups for certain characters. It's not just a defensive tool. It's your engine for tempo, pressure, and resource building. Dodge keeps you alive. Parry wins the fight. That's why, even when I kept getting knocked on my ass, I still kept chasing that parry window. Once the audio trick clicked, it stopped feeling like stubbornness and started feeling like understanding the language of the world. The game doesn't tell you this trick outright, but it's built for you to find it. The visual chaos is intentional. Camera shake, chiaroscuro lighting, effects exploding everywhere. Your eyes get overwhelmed, your ears don't. And when it finally comes together, when you're parrying by sound alone, chaining counters, watching AP flow back into your bar, it becomes one of the most satisfying combat rhythms in any turn-based RPG. It's funny, the fix wasn't get good, it was listen. The Act 1 painter. The guy most of us barely paid attention to because, let's be real, in your first hour you're too busy panicking about the gommage and hoarding chromas like they're toilet paper in a zombie game. He's just this chill NPC teaching you how paintings work, tossing out a line about how, maybe, someday, he hopes one of his works will be displayed in Lumiere's opera house. It's a humble little dream, the kind of thing you hear, nod politely at, and never think about again. Except the game remembers. By the time you reach Act 3, the tone has collapsed into something bitter and exhausted. Lumiere isn't the warm starting zone anymore. It's a memory wearing a cracked mask. The opera house is quiet. The air feels heavier. The world is coming apart. And nothing, absolutely nothing, tells you to look up. There's no sparkle effect, no objective marker, not even a sneaky camera pan. The game just trusts that you remember. And if you do, there it is, his painting, hanging high above the stage. Not a landscape, not a mythic figure, not some grand historic scene. It's Sophie and Gustave. The moment I saw that, I froze, because suddenly that throwaway NPC from Act 1 isn't background noise. He becomes a witness, someone who lived through everything that happened, someone who watched those two shape the story of Lumiere in their own small, tragic ways. And he chose to immortalize them, not as symbols, not as legends, just as they were. It lands especially hard because the game refuses to point at it. There's no tooltip saying, remember this guy? It's all subtext. If you catch it, you catch it. If you don't, the world keeps spinning. Just like real memory, just like real grief. The devs love their French heritage a little too much, and the baguette weapons are a perfect example of that. The baguette weapons are one of those facts that sound like a joke someone made up on Reddit, until you realize they're completely real, fully functional, and locked behind one of the most quietly evil completionist conditions in the whole game. Sandfall really said, what if we hid serious gear behind French bread, and then doubled down and made it mechanically meaningful. And the funniest part is that the game never warns you. Your very first playthrough drops 3 festival tokens in your lap during the Act 1 celebration. A cute little currency you naturally spend on trinkets, fun interactions, and novelty items. Because why wouldn't you? It's Act 1. It feels like harmless prologue fluff. Nobody in their right mind is hoarding those things. Except you absolutely should, because in New Game Plus, the rules change. The bakery store that's shut down in the prologue suddenly opens early, before the festival even kicks off. You walk up to it in New Game Plus, talk to the baker, and bam! There's a secret menu selling baguette weapons for each character. Not skins, not statless meme items, actual legit bread-based weaponry with decent power, unique animations, and the ability to smack late-game bosses with gluten-infused justice. But the baker only accepts festival tokens, and you only have the 3 you carried into New Game Plus. And here's the kicker. If you blew those tokens on your first run, which almost every first-time player does, they're gone forever for that file. No refund, no crafting them back, no late-game vendor. You have to finish the whole game again, restart New Game Plus, hoard the tokens like a doomsday prepper, and then trade them for bread. And since there's a baguette for every party member, 3 tokens gets you only 1 loaf per new game cycle. If you want the full set, if you want the complete bakery loadout, you're committing to multiple New Game Plus loops. Literal bread grinding. Literal bread grinding. I love that it's both ridiculous and kind of brilliant. It's the most French joke possible. Baguette weapons, but implemented like a hardcore JRPG secret. You don't just earn it, you plan for it, you think ahead. You sacrifice early game fun because deep down you know, one day you will need 6 handcrafted artisanal doomsticks. And here's the part I selfishly adore. The baguettes aren't throwaway gag items, they're actually good. There's something magical about slapping an endgame monstrosity with a warm, crusty loaf and watching the numbers pop like fireworks. It's dumb, it's delightful, and it's tuned with way more care than you'd expect for a bread-based arsenal. So yeah, the fact is simple. The game hides real, powerful joke weapons behind a completely missable New Game Plus trigger. There's a moment that made me laugh out loud first and then feel kind of awful about it 5 seconds later, which is basically Claire Obscure's entire brand. You're wandering through the world, already used to seeing gastrels collapsed in corners, and you come across one just slumped there on the ground. Could be dead, could be passed out, it's hard to tell. But what is very clear is the object sitting perfectly on top of him. A pristine, untouched cake. No plates, no crumbs. Just this immaculate little dessert balanced on a corpse like someone carefully placed it there and then never followed up. It's already weird enough on its own, but then a party member drops the line, "So the cake wasn't a lie." And my brain just went, oh, we're doing that now. It's such a straight shot to Portal 1 that anyone who's ever heard the cake is a lie even once gets it immediately. Portal turns cake into a gaming shorthand for fake promises, rewards that don't exist, goals you'll never reach, systems that string you along forever. Expedition 33 doesn't just reference it visually, it verbally flips it. The cake is absolutely real. You can see it, you can probably smell it. It's just that the guy who was supposed to eat it is gone. And the more you sit with that, the nastier it feels in the best way. In Portal, the cruelty is there was never going to be cake. In Expedition 33, the cruelty is the cake was real, but you didn't live long enough to enjoy it. Which, yeah, that's this world in one sentence. The reward wasn't a lie. Time was. Safety was. The idea that you'd get to the end of anything before the Gommage or a Nevron or sheer bad luck cut your story short. That's the real lie. What I love about this little gag is how much it tells you about the devs. They grew up on the same stuff we did. They know the memes. But they don't just copy-paste the joke and call it a day. They twist it to match their own universe's cruelty. In a place where entire age groups blink out of existence once a year and expeditions die nameless in caves, the promise was genuine. You just didn't make it. Hits way harder than there was never any cake. This is one of those mechanics that sounds like a meme at first. Then you try it once and suddenly you understand why people whisper about A-rank Verso builds like they're black magic. Verso's whole kit is built around style, CBAS, and the game trains you to worship that S-rank spike because that's where his raw numbers explode. So when you pick up a weapon whose first passive says Verso cannot reach S-rank, the normal reaction is, okay, so this is trash, right? Except it isn't. It's the opposite. It turns him into a stun-locking machine. The trick is Endbringer. The move the game never tells you is secretly one of the most abusable skills in the entire combat system. Endbringer has this hidden jewel in its description. At A rank, it extends the enemy's stun duration. And if you've played even a little, you know stuns in this game are gold. They freeze the enemy, open them up, and let you pile on damage safely. The problem is the normal rotation. You climb to A, you fire Endbringer. It knocks you into S. You can't repeat the stun extension. You only get the big Endbringer stun once per climb. Then you're stuck in S-rank territory where Endbringer loses its bonus. So you play the usual dance. Drop your style, rebuild, fire it again, hope you're fast enough to keep pace. But that cursed, useless weapon flips the script. By hardlocking Verso at A rank, it does something no other setup does. You get to use Endbringer again, and again, and again. And because Verso is naturally one of the highest speed characters in the party, once you dump points into agility and cycle his buffs properly, you can quite literally stunlock anything that isn't coded as stun immune. Bosses, elites, late game monsters, they just sit there while you chain Endbringer like some deranged rhythm game. Damage modifiers in Expedition 33 are one of those things you don't really think about until you're deep into the game. And then suddenly you're staring at the numbers like, wait, why did that hit break the sounds barrier? The game hides so much behind its stylish UI that most players never actually see the raw multipliers. But once you start digging, you realize every character has that one third gradient skill, the ultimate technique in their kit. And those skills aren't balanced around fairness, they're balanced around personality. Which brings us to Mael. Mael's Gommage isn't just the biggest single hit move in the game, it's the biggest for a reason. A 60 times modifier isn't strong, it's obscene. It's the kind of multiplier you look at and go, okay, someone on the dev team got sentimental and said, give her whatever she wants. But it makes perfect sense. Gauge is essentially a mini Gommage. You're not hitting the enemy, you're borrowing the cosmic rule that wipes entire age groups off the continent and pointing it at a single target. When the narrative justification is, I delete your existence, of course the damage chart bows to her. Just under that sits Lunae's Skybreak at 56 times, and honestly, that gap is storytelling in numbers. Skybreak is nuclear. It feels like the air pressure changes when Lunae throws it out, but Skybreak is still force. Physical, brutal, overwhelming force. Gommage is erasure. So even though the two sit next to each other on the modifier ladder, the gulf between 60 and 56 is the game literally whispering only the true eraser gets the throne. And this is where things get funny, because in normal play you don't always feel this gap. The strongest teams in Expedition 33 thrive on multi-hit spam, stacking buffs, breaking posture, setting up vulnerability windows, and letting crit engines spin at 200 miles per hour. Verso stunlocks, Mael melts things with burn stacking, Lunae deletes bosses with her crazy scaling. A lot of the real damage in this game comes from repeated punishment, not one dramatic punch. But when everything lines up, the buffs, the debuffs, the perfect break, the Lumina procs, maybe a cheeky vulnerability from a teammate, and you slam Gauge at the height of it, that's when you feel the difference. That's when you see the single biggest number your save file will ever display. It's the game giving you permission to say, yes, that was personal. And Skybreak being just behind it, that fits Lunae perfectly. She isn't divine, she isn't metaphysical. She just hits so hard reality considers quitting. She's the queen of raw force, and the fact that she sits right under Mael on the ladder says everything. Powerful enough to shatter the sky, but not powerful enough to rewrite existence. Weapons in Expedition 33 wear their influences proudly, and nowhere is that clearer than in the quiet little Bleach homage hiding in plain sight. It's one of those things you don't need to notice to enjoy the game, but once you do, you can't unsee it. And it fits the characters so well that it's hard to imagine it being accidental. Verso's Confuso is the most obvious nod. The thing is a slab. It's a sword the way Ichigo's early Zangetsu was a sword. Basically a sharpened steel door with a handle. Confuso has that same raw, unrefined silhouette. Long, straight-edged, broad enough that it looks like you could use it at a bridge plank. No fancy guard, no filigree, nothing whispering noble blade or ancient relic. It's just there. Heavy and unapologetic. It's the kind of weapon you don't finesse, you impose. And that lines up perfectly with Verso's entire deal. He's intense, emotional, haunted, and carrying way more weight than he lets people see. Giving him a weapon that looks like pure force is one of those subtle art decisions that just tells the truth louder than dialogue ever could. It says, this is a kid who doesn't need elegance. He needs something that hits as hard as the things he's lived through. Then you look at Mael's blade, the slender one with that clean silhouette and understated guard, and suddenly the duo snaps into classic anime balance. Her weapon is lean, graceful, almost serene. It's the visual opposite of Confuso in the same way Rukia's Sode no Shirayuki is the yin to Zangetsu's yang. Even if you've never seen Bleach, you can feel the contrast. Heavy versus light, raw versus refined, fire versus ice. And that fits Mael too. She's precise, focused. She fights like someone who knows exactly where the hits need to land, not someone trying to cleave the world open in frustration. Her blade matches her, controlled, elegant, deceptively dangerous. There's no lore page saying Confuso was forged in homage to Zangetsu. Nothing in universe ties these strips of metal to Bleach. It's all vibes, silhouettes, and decades of JRPG and shonen visual language quietly leaking into the DNA of a French studio. One of my favorite things about this game is that the title isn't just cool-sounding French flavor text. It's literally the mission statement. Clair Obscur is an art term first, a game title second. In painting, it's all about how you distribute light and shadow, how bright areas carve shapes out of darkness, how contrast makes things feel three-dimensional, how your eye is pulled through an image. Clair is the bright, clear part, obscure is the shadow, the murk. Together, they're not just light versus dark, they're the whole dance between the two. Clair Obscur, Expedition 33, takes that idea and just builds the entire game around it. Visually, it's obvious. Harsh lighting slicing through black streets, interiors bathed in glow while the edges fade into painterly shadow. Characters half lit like they stepped out of a Caravaggio piece. But it's just as true in the story. Everything is a mix of bright and dark. Aline's love twisted into obsession. Renoir's protection rotting into control. Mael's childhood turning out to be someone else's grief fantasy. Nothing is purely good or evil, purely hopeful or hopeless. It all lives in that in-between, that clair-obscure space where beauty and horror are glued together. The name basically tells you up front. This game is about contrasts, light and dark, memory and erasure, creation and destruction. Claire's story hits so hard later in the game that going back to her first appearance almost feels unfair in hindsight, because technically her prologue isn't in a cutscene or a lore dump. It's right there in the middle of the festival, when you don't even know who she is yet, and Lumiere still feels like a place where good things might happen. During the festival in Lumiere, there's a stage where a troupe of dancers are performing with pictos exploding into color around them. It's loud, bright, busy, and the whole point is that you're supposed to take it in as one big crowd scene. But tucked right there, in the middle of all that noise and spectacle, is Claire. Not painted Claire, not mana Claire, not terrifying architect of the Neverons Claire. Just Claire, younger, softer, casual clothes, dancing like any other Lumerian celebrating before the gommage drops. And the game absolutely refuses to draw attention to it. No cutscene zoom, no voiceover that says, "Hey look, it's Claire," no lore pop-up. She doesn't acknowledge you and you can't talk to her. She's just one more dancer in the ensemble, blending into the color and movement. It's the most wonderfully rude kind of foreshadowing, because later, much later, when you meet her in the story and finally understand who Claire is, what happened to her, what she did to her own painted self, and how deep her anger runs, you remember that festival dancer, that tiny silhouette you probably walked right past, that moment where she was just another girl in Lumiere living her life. Most players miss it entirely on their first run. The flying casino was already peak what if Las Vegas was built by extremely petty birds? But one of my favorite little details there is how the game quietly bakes racism into a throwaway NPC gag. You've got this Gastrel just lounging around, attitude cranked to maximum, and if you walk up to him as any human, Gustave, Mael, Verso, whoever, he treats you like gum on his shoe. Short, dismissive dialogue, zero useful info, no reward. Just pure get away from me ground mammal energy. The first time I met him, I just assumed he was a generic grump and moved on. But if you swap your lead to Monaco and talk to him again, he instantly flips. Suddenly he's chatty, suddenly he's helpful, and suddenly he's handing over a special cosmetic outfit like they're long-lost cousins. The game never spells it out, but the joke writes itself. He doesn't hate you, he hates humans. His whole vibe goes from rude NPC to speciest uncle at the Gastrel family reunion the moment Monaco waddles up. And I love that the reward is locked specifically behind that perspective shift. It's the game's way of saying, hey, by the way, the discrimination in this world isn't just humans judging Gastrels. Some of these little guys are absolutely judging you right back. Collecting in Expedition 33 is one of those things that feels simple when you start. Oh cool, little cards, little records. And then somewhere around Act 3, you realize you've accidentally wandered into a full-blown treasure hunt, designed by people who love hiding things behind columns, under staircases, on cliffs, and inside feelings. The headline number still blows my mind every time I say it out loud. 193 pictos. Not around 200, not 100-ish. No, the devs sat down and said, 193, and you feel every single one. Pictos aren't just stat stickers, they're tiny role-defining perks. They change crit behavior, elemental buildup, guard break potency, healing tempo, resource flow, combo routes. Some are character specific, Some only unlock after relationship arcs. Some are tied to bosses, and some only appear if you choose one story option over another. That means you can absolutely miss them. The game's not shy about that. A good portion of the 193 live in that if you didn't poke the weird corner, that's on you zone. The funniest moment in my own hunt was realizing I was sitting at 192 and the last missing Picto was from the one super boss I had sworn I would never fight again. I fought it again. It humbled me. Again. But the real curveball is that to get all 193, you can't just clear the map once. You have to practically comb it. Flying casino, hidden chests, visages, ledges you'd never think to climb. The Opera House? Don't even get me started. And if you're a completionist, New Game Plus. No way around it. And then the game turns around and does the same thing with its other collectible set, with a wink. Because while Pictos go huge, the music discs go poetic. 33 records. 33. A perfect little echo of the title, baked right into the collectibles like a signature. These records are hidden just as mischievously as the Pictos, tucked into side buildings, shoved into a casino machine, rewarded for doing things no sane person would do unless they love the game too much. Every disc is a little piece of the original soundtrack you can play in Lumiere or the casino, and hunting them feels like collecting memories of all the places you have been to. I love when a JRPG quietly dares you to do something stupid, and then actually lets you get away with it. That early armor grab is exactly that. On paper, the game clearly expects you to be in rags and mid-tier gear until somewhere deep in Act 3. Enemy damage curves, boss checks, all of it is tuned around the idea that your defense is going to climb in a slow, gentle slope. And then the moment you decide, what if I just sprinted into this late game zone I have no business being in? The whole system tips over. Because if you manage to sneak into that area early and grab a high-tier defensive piece that gives you 4-digit armor long before you're meant to have it, the combat math collapses. Act 2 enemies that were tuned to chunk off half your bar suddenly just tickle you. Bosses that were supposed to be your first real walls just bounce. It stops feeling like survival and starts feeling like bullying. What makes it so funny is that nothing actually breaks. There's no glitch, no exploit menu, no out-of-bounds nonsense. The world is just open. The enemies in that region are horrifying at low levels, but they can be avoided. The designers clearly assumed fear would be enough. We don't need a key or an invisible wall here. You'll see the monsters and go, yeah, not just yet. They miscalculated how nosy some of us are. So when you do it, when you thread your way through, grab the armor and walk back out alive, it genuinely feels like you stole something from the game. Like you slipped behind the pacing and yanked a reward off the Act 3 shelf while nobody was looking. And thematically it kinda fits. Expedition 33 is built on the idea that danger isn't cleanly gated. The gommage doesn't care if you're ready. The world doesn't warn you nicely before it ruins you. So of course the reverse is also true. If you're reckless enough, you can get power earlier than you should. The game doesn't cheer, doesn't pop an achievement, doesn't give you a wink-wink cutscene. It just shrugs and silently updates the numbers. The result is absurd in the best way. You stroll back into areas designed to terrify you, and suddenly you're tanking hits that were supposed to be lethal checks on your timing. You start eating attacks on purpose, just to prove you can. All the careful balance around parries, dodges, and resource management gets overwritten by one quiet fact. You walked somewhere you weren't supposed to, and now you're the scariest thing in the room. Ciel is one of those characters the game pretends is simple at first, just so it can quietly break your heart later. Early on, the expedition sees her as the reliable one, the voice you want to hear when things go bad, the person who somehow makes even terror feel manageable. But the more you learn, the more you realize she came from the gentlest life among the team. She wasn't a soldier or a guard or a specialist shaped by conflict. She was a teacher in Lumiere, a woman whose world was a classroom full of laughter, chalk dust, and the kind of tiny triumphs only children can give you. Every bracelet on her arm is a gift from those students, a little "don't forget us" she chose to carry into danger. Each one flashes when she casts a spell, like a reminder of exactly who she's fighting for. And then you notice the wrist guard. It sits right beside those bracelets, but it feels heavier, not physically but emotionally. Engraved on it are the words, "To your promised birthday." In any other world, it would be sweet. In Lumiere, where every birthday is a countdown toward possible erasure, the message is almost painful. Someone, one child or several, gave Ciel a charm of hope. They believed she would come back. They believed she'd survive long enough for another candle, another year. They made her a promise the world might not let her keep. Ciel still wears it. She doesn't talk about it. She lets it sit there on her arm, next to all the little bracelets, quietly carrying everyone's hope because she refuses to leave it behind. And here's the detail that ties everything together. That wrist guard looks exactly like an archer's bracer. It protects the forearm from the snap of a bowstring, something Ciel never uses in the final game. Players spotted it immediately, because it doesn't match her kit, her animations, or her role. It's a leftover from early development, from an older version of Ciel where she wasn't a radiant caster but a ranged bow user. Instead of removing the bracer when her class changed, the devs folded it into her story. They repainted it, just like the world itself gets repainted. They turned an old combat asset into a sentimental object tied to her life before the expedition. That's the magic of her design. Gestrel Village is full of weird little jokes and ritual phrases, but there's one line there that goes from, that's cute, to, oh wait, that's about me, if you think about it for more than 10 seconds. You run into this Gestrel who casually tells you, I was just reborn at the Sacred River. I'm only X hours old. At first, it just sounds like mystical bird nonsense. This is the same game that gives you volleyball trauma and mushroom death caves, so reborn at the Sacred River barely even registers as unusual. But then your brain does the math. That X looks familiar. You check your save, and you realize it's not a random number. It's your actual playtime. The game is literally reading your save data, grabbing your total hours, and using that as this Gestrel's age. So if you've been playing for 12 hours, he's 12 hours old. If you've sunk 47 hours into the run before reaching him, he's 47 hours old. He is, in the most ridiculous way possible, a little avatar of your obsession with the game, standing there announcing exactly how long you've been trapped in this painted nightmare. And it fits so well with Expedition 33's whole fixation on time. Everywhere else, age is terrifying. The Gommage number, the doomed 33, birthdays as countdowns to erasure. Here, in this one throwaway NPC, time becomes something else, a meta joke. Your hours aren't just behind the scenes anymore. They get reincarnated as a Gestrel who proudly tells you how long you have existed in this world. Esquier is one of those characters who seems like a walking joke machine the first time you meet him. Twitchy, off rhythm, bouncing between nonsense and genius. But once the story opens up, you realize almost every random thing he says is wearing a mask. His humor isn't meaningless. It's camouflage for what he knows and what he's lived through. Take his early scenes with Ciel. On the surface, it feels like two strangers meeting for the first time. She treats him that way, and the script plays along. But Act 3 quietly rewrites your entire understanding of their dynamic. Years before the expedition, when Ciel tried to drown herself in grief after losing her husband Pierre, it was Esquier who found her and saved her. The game never turns this into a melodramatic flashback or a tragic cutscene. It just lets the truth sit there. The goofy Gestrel with all the weird jokes was the one who pulled her back from the edge. Suddenly, all his little comments start vibrating with extra meaning. That one line everyone laughs at, "I'm also sad when I lose my rocks," hits completely differently. When you realize Pierre literally means stone or rock in French, that joke becomes a quiet acknowledgement. Esquier knows exactly what she lost. He just phrases it the only way he knows how. Strange, indirect, soft enough to not hurt her again. It's the kind of writing trick Claire Obscure loves, buying emotional truth inside silliness so it doesn't break you too early. Even Esquier's name feels like it has a hidden layer. Fans have pointed out that Esquier may be a reference to Pierre Esquier, a real 19th century French architect. If that's intentional, and given how many Belle Epoque and French art references this game hides, it probably is. Then the parallel becomes almost poetic. The real Esquier was literally a builder, shaping structures and restoring monuments. In Expedition 33, Esquier quietly does the same thing. He supports, restores, and holds people together even when they don't realize he's doing it. He's emotional scaffolding with feathers. Renoir's Atelier is one of those spaces that feels normal the first time you walk through it, and then gets more and more cursed the longer you actually look at what's on the walls. If you stand in front of his big canvas in the real-world studio and really stare, you can see it. Under the current layer of paint, there's another image ghosting through. faint shapes, dissolving outlines, those petal-like fragments drifting upward. It's not random texture, it's the gommage of Lumiere, the moment the city died, painted once, then buried. That alone says a lot about Renoir. He didn't destroy that painting, he painted over it. The original scene is still right there under the surface, half smothered by whatever he tried to put on top. It's the most painterly version of repression you could imagine. He records the horror, can't live with seeing it, and instead of erasing the canvas, he drowns it in new layers. The memory is preserved and denied at the same time. And then you reach the manor. Inside that floating house of family secrets, you eventually unlock Renoir's atelier again, his room, his space, but twisted into canvas logic. And hanging there, more visible, more legible, is that same gommage of Lumiere scene. People breaking into petals, the city coming apart. The thing he tried to bury in the real studio is now framed and waiting for you in his private painted one. The manor is where all the Desandre family's truths go when they can't live in the real world anymore. So the fact that this version of the gommage painting lives there tells its own story. Somebody took it, somebody saved it. Instead of letting that canvas sit in the real atelier as evidence, they pulled it into the manor and hid it where only those who dig through the family's psyche can find it. That's where the Alicia theory feels so right, even if the game never stamps it canon on screen. It makes emotional sense that she'd be the one to rescue that image, the child at the center of the whole tragedy, grabbing the one painting that shows what actually happened to her city and locking it away in the only place the world can't casually walk into. The Flying Manor is already one of the strangest, most haunted feeling spaces in Expedition 33. All warped hallways, personal grief, and Claire's fragmented psyche painted into architecture. But once you start noticing the Nevron statues scattered around, it gets even weirder. They're not just decoration, they're fossils of ideas. Things the game once meant to use but never actually put into motion. And then there's that statue. A Nevron, sculpted in full detail, holding two swords. The stance is unmistakable, a dual-sword cultist pose, poised like a mid-tier elite enemy, clearly designed to be fought. It even matches the body language and silhouette of other Nevron variants, just more aggressive, more elite mini-boss coded. And yet you never fight that enemy, not once, not in any zone, not in post-game, not even in the weird optional corners that hide super bosses and late-game horrors. It simply doesn't exist in actual combat, which tells you exactly what happens behind the scenes. That dual-blade Nevron was a planned enemy type, far enough along to have a full model, rig, animations, and an art pass polished enough to be immortalized as a statue in Claire's manor. But somewhere late in the production, probably during the combat balancing pass or the late content triage, that enemy got cut. Maybe it didn't fit the pacing, maybe it overlapped too much with an existing unit. Maybe its AI wasn't finished in time. Whatever the reason, the fight was scrapped, but the statue stayed. The manor, already a museum of Claire's broken creations, accidentally became a museum of Sandfall's unused enemies too. And because this game has one of the most dedicated modding communities for something so new, the story doesn't end there. On PC, players dug into the internal game files and found the whole cut enemy roster sitting dormant, including the dual-sword cultist. Modders have since re-enabled them, spawning them in test arenas and combat sequences to see how they behave. In the prologue in Lumiere, the game quietly hides one of its weirdest, and easiest to miss, secrets behind a door you're absolutely not meant to keep knocking on. Right before the gommage hits, you can find a small hotel-like building where a pair of NPCs, appropriately labelled life enjoyers, are clearly in the middle of some very enthusiastic business. Interacting with the door just plays muffled sounds, and the game gives you no visual cue, no dialogue prompt, nothing to suggest that more pressure will do anything at all. Most players hit it once, maybe twice, and walk away thinking it's just ambient flavour. But if you're stubborn, or curious, or nosy, like me, and you keep knocking exactly 33 times, the entire scene changes. On that final interaction, the couple finally breaks character, stops what they're doing, and calls you out directly for listening in for way too long. They even comment that you made things more exciting at first, but that now it's officially just awkward. And to top it off, they hand you a color of luminar through the door, literally paying you to leave them alone and stop interrupting their fun. In The Crows, one of the creepiest little side zones in Clair Obscur Expedition 33, there's a fully hidden boss fight that only appears if you decide to commit bird-based genocide. At first glance, the crows just look like set dressing. A foggy mini-area filled with whispering voices and chromatic crows perched in weird places. Most players just walk through, maybe snipe 1 or 2 birds for fun, and move on. But if you pull out free aim and shoot every single one of those coloured crows, the game triggers something it never once hints at. A secret Nevron boss quietly spawns behind you. And what makes this guy special isn't his damage. It's that he dodges like he's trying out for Expedition 32. The fight isn't about surviving. It's about actually landing a hit. Once you finally pin him down and finish the job, the game hands you one of the wildest defensive tools in the entire Picto system, the Shielding Death Picto. Now here's where the fun begins. Shielding Death gives all surviving party members a big temporary shield the moment the wearer dies. On its own, that's already spicy. You can turn your tank into a walking safety switch. But the real insanity comes when you pair it with any auto-death type Picto. Those Pictos let you force the wearer to die automatically under specific conditions, which means you can intentionally pop your own teammate like a defensive landmine to shield the entire squad right before major enemy attacks. It's one of those setups where death stops being a punishment and turns into a cooldown you can weaponize, and the game hides it in a tiny corner of the map, locked behind a crow sniping checklist nobody stumbles into naturally. So, I have to ask, does the artist still live on through their work? Or is it we who live on through these memories? And the 2 controversial endings of Clair Obscur give us precisely a glimpse of this reflection. Everyone has their own answer. There is no right or wrong. And as Guillaume Broche wanted, as he said in several interviews, the goal of all this is also to let players have their own interpretation of the work, to reflect, to theorize, and ultimately to make the work live on through them. In any case, I'm really looking forward to them continuing the Clair Obscur universe in other games so we can be amazed and make another video for you about it. And that's it, the end to our journey in Lumiere. If you enjoyed Lumiere, you'll love the lands between, so feel free to watch the Elden Ring video next.